They called her a curse, a barren widow who'd brought nothing but shame to the Moore family name, so they dumped her like trash at a stranger's cabin in the dead of winter, a punishment disguised as charity. The cowboy who answered the door wanted nothing to do with their cruelty or their cast-off. But when Eliza Moore collapsed in the snow, pride and fury burning in her eyes even as frost claimed her skin, Grant Holloway faced a choice: let her die and prove the world right, or save her and risk everything he'd built in isolation. Neither knew this brutal beginning would crack them both open. Before we begin, if you enjoy this story of two broken souls finding hope against all odds, please hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's step into the frozen mountains of 1887. The wagon lurched to a stop, and Eliza Moore knew this was the end of one life, though what came next remained a terrifying blank. She'd been riding for 3 days in the back of a supply wagon, wrapped in a thin wool blanket that did nothing against the January cold. Her brother-in-law's hired man, a silent brute named Davy, hadn't spoken more than 10 words since they'd left the Moore estate in Denver. The message was clear. She wasn't worth conversation. She wasn't worth anything at all. Through the gap in the canvas cover, Eliza caught her first glimpse of her destination. A log cabin sat in a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines heavy with snow. Smoke rose from the chimney in a lazy curl. The mountains pressed in from all sides, vast and indifferent. This was the edge of nowhere, exactly where the Moores wanted her. "Out!" Davy grunted, not bothering to help as she climbed down. Her boots sank into snow up to her ankles. The cold bit through her dress immediately. She clutched her single carpet bag, containing 2 dresses, a shawl, and the photograph of Thomas she hadn't been able to leave behind, and stared at the cabin. The door opened. The man who emerged was tall and lean, dressed in worn denim and a sheepskin coat. His face was weathered, sharp-planed, with eyes the color of winter sky. A beard covered his jaw, and his dark hair touched his collar. He looked at the wagon, then at Eliza, and his expression went carefully blank. "Grant Holloway?" Davy called out. "That's right." "Got a delivery for you, one widow woman, as arranged." Davy said it like he was dropping off a sack of potatoes. "Calvin Moore sends his regards." Grant's jaw tightened. "He does he?" "Said you'd know what to do with her." Eliza's spine went rigid. What to do with her? Like she was a problem to be solved, not a person standing right there in the snow. Grant walked closer, his boots crunching in the snow. He studied her face, really looked at her, and something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of something he understood too well. "Mrs. Moore," he said quietly, "I'm sorry for your loss." The unexpected kindness cracked something inside her chest, but Eliza locked her jaw against it. She'd cried all her tears in the 2 months since Thomas died. The Moores had made sure of that, first with their cold comfort, then with their accusations, and finally with their exile. "Don't be," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Everyone else has stopped bothering." Davy tossed a wooden crate down from the wagon. "Supplies from the family. They'll send more in spring, provided she's still—" He trailed off, but the implication hung in the frozen air. Provided she's still alive. Provided she hasn't run off or died of shame. "Tell Calvin Moore," Eliza said, turning to face Davy fully, "that I received his message loud and clear." Davy shrugged, already climbing back onto the wagon seat. "Ain't my business, ma'am. I just do what I'm paid for." Within minutes, the wagon was gone, its tracks already filling with fresh snow. Eliza stood alone in the clearing with a stranger, miles from anything resembling civilization. The wind picked up, cutting through her inadequate coat. She shivered but refused to show weakness. Grant picked up the crate with ease. "You should come inside before you freeze." "I can manage." "I don't doubt it." He started toward the cabin, then paused. "But managing and surviving the winter are 2 different things up here. Your choice." He disappeared inside, leaving the door open. An invitation, not an order. Eliza stared at that open doorway. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But to where? The nearest town was 15 miles through mountain passes she didn't know. She had no horse, no supplies, no money beyond the few coins hidden in her bag. The Moores had made sure of that too. Pride warred with reality. Reality won. She picked up her carpet bag and followed him inside. The cabin was larger than it looked from outside. One main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area in back, and a ladder leading to what must be a sleeping loft. Simple furniture, everything built for function rather than comfort. But it was warm, blessedly warm, and clean in a way that spoke of careful attention. Grant set the crate on a rough-hewn table. There's a room through that door, used to be storage, but I cleared it out when I got Calvin's letter. It's got a bed and a stove, not much else. When did you get his letter? Eliza asked. 3 weeks ago. Grant moved to the fireplace, adding another log. He said you were recently widowed, said you needed a place to stay until you could be settled properly. The last words carried a bitter edge. He didn't mention he was dumping you here against your will. Would it have mattered? Grant turned to look at her straight on. Yes. The simple honesty in that single word hit harder than any of Calvin's elaborate cruelties. Eliza found herself without a response. I'll be clear about the situation, Mrs. Moore, Grant continued, his voice level. I don't want to be part of whatever game your family's playing. I agreed to let you stay because Calvin offered good money and I needed supplies for the ranch. But I won't be party to cruelty. The ranch? Eliza glanced around the cabin. Cattle ranch down in the valley, 100 head, give or take. I'm up here for winter because the line shack's easier to manage when the snow gets deep. Come spring, I move back down. He paused. Or I did. This year's different. Because of me. Because Calvin Moore thought he could buy silence and solitude. Grant's expression hardened. But here's what's going to happen instead. You can stay until the pass clears in April. That gives you 3 months to figure out your next move. In exchange, you work. There's plenty that needs doing. Cooking, mending, helping with the stock when the weather allows. You pull your weight, I'll make sure you're fed and warm. Come spring, I'll give you supplies and enough money to get you to California or wherever else you want to go. Eliza's throat tightened. Why would you do that? Because nobody deserves to be thrown away like you were. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And because I know what it's like to have your life taken apart by people who think they know better. There was a story there, buried in those words. But before Eliza could respond, Grant grabbed his coat from a peg by the door. I need to check the stock before dark. Your room's through there. Unpack, rest, whatever you need. There's stew in the pot if you're hungry. He paused at the door. One more thing. I value my privacy, Mrs. Moore. I don't ask questions about your past. You don't ask about mine. We're both here to survive winter, nothing more. Then he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Eliza stood in the center of the warm cabin, still clutching her bag, and felt the full weight of her situation crash down. She'd gone from the Moore mansion, with its Persian rugs and crystal chandeliers, to a mountain cabin where she was expected to earn her keep like a servant. She'd gone from being Thomas's cherished wife to being the family shame, shipped off to the wilderness. The smart thing would be to accept Grant's offer, keep her head down, work hard, leave in spring. But Eliza had tried being smart. She'd tried being obedient and grateful and everything a proper widow should be. It had earned her nothing but contempt and exile. She walked to the small room Grant had mentioned. It was barely bigger than a closet, with a narrow bed, a pot-bellied stove, and a single window looking out at the pines. But the blankets were clean, and someone, Grant she assumed, had already laid a fire in the stove. Eliza set down her bag and sat on the bed. The mattress was stuffed with corn husks, crackling under her weight. Nothing like the feather bed she'd shared with Thomas. Thomas. She pulled the photograph from her bag with trembling fingers. He smiled up at her, forever young and healthy, frozen in the moment before consumption had stolen his strength and then his life. They'd been married only 18 months. 18 months of happiness followed by 6 months of slow dying, then 2 months of being interrogated about her failure to produce an heir. You were too much for him, Calvin had said at the funeral, his voice low enough that others wouldn't hear. Wore him out with your demands. A proper wife would have given him peace and a son. You gave him neither. The words had cut deep because part of her wondered if they were true. Had she failed Thomas somehow? Had her grief been selfish? Had she... No. Eliza shoved the photograph back in her bag. She wouldn't do this. Wouldn't let Calvin's poison seep into her thoughts again. Thomas had loved her. He'd told her so, even at the end, his voice barely a whisper. Whatever the Moores believed, whatever lies they told themselves, that love had been real. She stood and moved to the window. Through the glass, she could see Grant walking toward a small barn, his figure dark against the snow. He moved with purpose, comfortable in this harsh landscape. A man who valued privacy and asked no questions. A man who'd agreed to hide her away for money. Eliza's hands curled into fists. She didn't need his pity or his charity. She'd find a way out of this trap the Moores had set. Somehow. The first week passed in careful silence. Grant kept his distance, spending most of his time with the cattle or working in the barn. Eliza stayed in her small room, venturing out only for meals and to use the outhouse. They circled each other like wary animals, speaking only when necessary. More coffee? No, thank you. I'll be out with the herd until dark. All right. It was easier than Eliza expected. Grant didn't try to make conversation or force companionship. He simply existed in his space while she existed in hers. But the isolation gnawed at her. Back in Denver, even in her grief, there had been noise. Servants bustling about, Calvin's wife hosting her endless teas, the city sounds drifting through windows. Here, there was only the wind in the pines and the occasional low of cattle. The silence pressed in until Eliza wanted to scream just to hear something. On the 8th day, she decided to leave her room. Not to talk to Grant. He was out checking fence lines. But to do something other than stare at log walls and count the hours until spring. The main room was spotless. Grant clearly kept everything in order, from the neatly stacked firewood to the carefully arranged cooking supplies. Eliza's fingers itched for occupation. She'd been raised to manage a household, trained in all the skills a proper wife needed. Cooking, sewing, preserving, organizing, she knew them all. The stew pot hung over the fire, and Eliza lifted the lid. What she found made her wince. Venison, potatoes, and onions in water. Edible, but barely seasoned. The herbs on the shelf were old and weak. Before she could talk herself out of it, Eliza began to cook. She started with bread, mixing flour and water and the sourdough starter she found in a crock. While it rose, she tackled the stew, adding salt and pepper she found in unlabeled jars, tasting until the flavor improved. Then she moved to mending. Grant's clothes were clean but full of poorly sewn repairs, stitches too large and uneven. Hours passed. Eliza lost herself in the familiar rhythm of work, her hands remembering skills she'd thought would matter in her marriage, in the life she'd planned. She was pulling the bread from the oven when the door opened. Grant stopped in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders, staring at the transformed cabin. The smell of fresh bread filled the air. His mended shirt hung drying near the fire. The stew bubbled with actual flavor. "What are you doing?" he asked. Eliza felt her defenses rise. "Working, as you demanded." "I didn't demand anything." "You said I'd work for my keep. I'm working." Grant closed the door slowly, still watching her. "Mrs. Moore, it's just Eliza." The formality grated. "No need for titles when I'm scrubbing your floors. You don't have to, don't I?" She faced him fully, flour on her hands and anger in her throat. "You made the terms clear. I work or I leave." "Well, I can't leave, so I work." "That's not what I meant." Grant's voice rose slightly, frustration breaking through his usual calm. "I meant you'd help where you could, not turn yourself into a servant." "What's the difference?" "The difference is choice." He pulled off his coat with sharp movements. "I won't have you thinking you're enslaved here. You want to help? Fine. You want to stay in your room? That's fine too. But don't act like I'm some tyrant forcing labor." The outburst startled them both into silence. Eliza's heart pounded. This was the most emotion Grant had shown since she arrived. The first crack in his careful control. It reminded her that he was as trapped in this situation as she was, bound by whatever deal Calvin had struck. "I don't know what else to do," she admitted quietly. "If I sit still, I think. If I think, I remember. If I remember—" She couldn't finish, couldn't explain how the memories came like wolves, tearing at her until she wanted to run into the snow and never stop. Grant's expression shifted. The anger drained away, replaced by something that looked like understanding. "Yeah," he said softly. "I know that feeling. He moved to the table and sat down heavily. After a moment, Eliza joined him. The deal Calvin offered, Grant said, staring at his hands, was simple. Let you stay the winter, keep you out of sight, and he'd pay enough to get me through next year. I needed the money. Ranch has been struggling, and I lost half my herd to rustlers last fall, so I agreed. Without knowing I didn't want to be here. Without knowing a lot of things. He looked up at her. But I'm not stupid, Eliza. The way that man dumped you here, the way he talked about you, I knew something was wrong. I just needed the money too badly to ask questions. The honesty was like a knife, clean and sharp. Eliza appreciated it more than any false kindness. They blame me, she heard herself say, for Thomas dying without an heir. As if I could control consumption, as if I didn't grieve him too. Her voice cracked. Calvin said I was a burden, said the family had no use for a barren widow who couldn't even manage basic wifely duties. Grant's jaw worked. That's horseshit. Despite everything, a startled laugh escaped her. Excuse me? It's horseshit, Grant repeated firmly. My wife died of fever 3 years ago, took our daughter with her. If someone had told me it was my fault for not protecting them, I'd have put my fist through their teeth. Eliza stared at him. He'd mentioned his past so casually, sharing grief like it was something ordinary, not shameful or secret, just painful and real. I'm sorry, she whispered. Me too. He stood and moved to the stew pot, ladling out 2 bowls. But here's what I learned. Grief makes people cruel. Some because they don't know what else to do. Some because they're scared of their own feelings. And some because they're just mean all the way through. He set a bowl in front of her, along with a thick slice of the bread she'd baked. Calvin Moore strikes me as the third kind, Grant continued. So whatever he told you, whatever the family said, it says more about them than you. Eliza picked up her spoon but couldn't eat. The words sat in her chest, heavy and unfamiliar. When was the last time someone had taken her side, had believed her without question? Why are you being kind to me? She asked. Grant settled back in his chair. Because somebody should have been kind to you months ago. And because I meant what I said. Nobody deserves to be thrown away. They ate in silence, but it felt different now. Less like 2 strangers avoiding each other and more like 2 people sharing space, sharing survival. After the meal, Grant washed the dishes while Eliza dried. The domestic routine felt strange and comfortable all at once. The bread's good, Grant said eventually. Better than anything I've made. Cooking was one of my few acceptable talents, according to my mother-in-law. Eliza couldn't keep the bitterness out entirely. Though apparently not enough to make up for my other failures. Their failures, you mean? She glanced at him. What? They failed you. Failed to see your worth. Failed to protect you when you needed it. Grant set down the pot he was scrubbing. That's on them, Eliza, not you. The simple certainty in his voice made her eyes burn. She blinked hard against tears she refused to shed. I should finish the mending, she said, needing to move to escape before she broke. All right. Grant didn't push. I'll be in the barn if you need anything. He left her alone, and Eliza was grateful. She settled by the fire with his shirts, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind spun. 3 months. She had 3 months until spring, until the past cleared and she could leave this place. 3 months to figure out who she was beyond Thomas's widow, beyond the Moore family's shame. 3 months with a man who'd lost as much as she had, maybe more. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the cabin's corners. Snow began to fall again, thick and steady. Eliza watched through the window as Grant emerged from the barn, his coat pulled tight, and checked the woodpile. He'd saved her life the day she arrived, though she hadn't recognized it then. Not just by taking her in, but by seeing her as human, as someone deserving of basic dignity. It was more than anyone else had offered in months. Eliza finished the shirt she was mending and held it up to the firelight. The stitches were even and strong, nearly invisible. Good work. The kind of work that mattered, even if no one noticed. She was still holding the shirt when Grant came back inside, stomping snow from his boots. Storm's getting worse, he announced. We'll be snowed in by morning. For how long? Day or 2, probably. Maybe 3. He hung his coat carefully. We've got plenty of supplies. Nothing to worry about. But Eliza was worrying. 2 or 3 days trapped in close quarters with a man she barely knew, in a place where the silence could suffocate. 2 or 3 days with nothing to do but think. As if reading her mind, Grant pulled a wooden box from a shelf. "You play checkers?" She blinked. Yes. A little." "Good." He set up the board on the table. "I'm tired of playing against myself." They played until the fire burned low, neither speaking much, but the quiet felt less oppressive with something to focus on. Grant won 3 games to her 1, but Eliza could see she was improving, learning his strategies. When they finally said goodnight, Eliza returned to her small room with something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not happiness, she wasn't ready for that, but maybe the faintest beginning of peace. She lit the stove and climbed into bed, listening to Grant move around the main room, banking the fire, checking the door. The sounds of another person living, existing, surviving. For the first time since arriving, Eliza thought she might actually make it to spring. Awesome. The storm lasted 4 days. By the second day, Eliza and Grant had fallen into an uneasy rhythm. She cooked while he tended the animals, braving the blizzard to feed the cattle and horses. They played cards in the afternoon, checkers in the evening. They talked in careful circles, sharing surface details while avoiding the depths. But on the 3rd day, cabin fever set in. Eliza woke feeling like the walls were closing in. She tried to ignore it, throwing herself into unnecessary cleaning, scrubbing floors that didn't need it. But the restlessness wouldn't fade. Grant noticed. He always noticed. "You need to get outside," he said after lunch. "In a blizzard?" "Storm's dying down. Besides, fresh air helps." He pulled extra clothing from a trunk. "Here." These were Sarah's. His wife's name, spoken casually. Eliza took the offered coat and pants, practical riding clothes that would have scandalized the ladies of Denver society. They bundled up and stepped into the white world. The snow came up past Eliza's knees in places, and the cold hit like a physical force. But Grant was right. The storm had lessened to occasional flurries, and the air was so clean it hurt to breathe. "Come on," Grant called, already walking toward the tree line. "I'll show you something." Eliza followed, struggling through the deep snow. She'd never been athletic, never needed to be. But something about the exertion felt good, felt purposeful. They walked for 20 minutes until Eliza's lungs burned and her legs ached. Then Grant stopped at the edge of a cliff she hadn't known was there. The view stole her breath. The valley stretched below, vast and white and perfect. Mountains ringed it on all sides, their peaks disappearing into clouds. In the far distance, she could just make out the dark line of a river, frozen solid. Nothing moved. Nothing human existed in that pristine landscape. "I come here when it gets to be too much," Grant said quietly. "Reminds me how small my problems are, how big the world is." Eliza understood. Standing there, she felt her grief and anger and shame shrink to manageable size. They didn't disappear, she suspected they never would, but they lost some of their power. "Thank you," she said, "for bringing me here. Thank you for not giving up." She looked at him, surprised. "What?" Grant's eyes were on the valley, but his expression was intent. "That first day I thought you might not make it. You looked half dead already, like you'd given up fighting. But you haven't. You're still here, still trying." He finally met her gaze. "That takes strength." Eliza's throat tightened. "I don't feel strong." "Nobody does, but you are, anyway." They stood in silence, watching the valley, until the cold drove them back to the cabin. But something had shifted. Some invisible wall between them had developed a crack. That night after dinner, Grant spoke first. "Can I ask you something?" Eliza tensed, but nodded. "What did you want? Before Thomas, before the Moors, what did you dream about?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in years, maybe ever. "I wanted to teach," she said slowly. "I was good with children, good at explaining things. My father thought it was a waste, that I should focus on finding a husband, but I used to imagine having a little schoolhouse somewhere, helping kids learn to read and write." "You could still do that." "Could I?" Eliza laughed bitterly. "A scandalous widow with no references, no money, no connections? What school would hire me?" "One that needs a teacher more than it needs society's approval." Grant leaned back in his chair. There are towns out west desperate for educated people. They don't care about your past if you can do the work. The idea was so foreign, so impossible that Eliza couldn't quite grasp it. But it planted itself in her mind anyway, a tiny seed of possibility. "What about you?" she asked. "What did you dream about?" Grant was quiet for a long moment. "I wanted what I had, a wife, a daughter, a ranch to build together. I wanted to prove I could make something from nothing, that I wasn't just some drifter." His voice went rough. "I got it all. Then I lost it. Now I just want to get through each day without the grief killing me." The raw honesty hit Eliza square in the chest. She'd spent so much time wrapped in her own pain that she hadn't fully considered his. But here was a man who'd built a life, loved deeply, and had it all ripped away. "How do you do it?" she whispered. "How do you keep going?" "I work. I focus on what needs doing, feed the cattle, mend the fence, chop the wood, small things that add up." He met her eyes. "And I try not to think about the big things too much. Can't change the past, can't predict the future. Just survive today." It was the most he'd ever said at once, and Eliza felt honored by the trust implicit in sharing it. "I'm trying," she said, "to survive today. Some days I manage, some days I don't. That's all anyone can do." They talked late into the night, sharing fragments of their pasts in careful doses. Eliza told him about Thomas's laugh, the way he'd loved terrible poetry. Grant told her about his daughter Emma, how she'd been fearless and curious and bright as summer. They didn't talk about the dying, the sickness that took Thomas, the fever that claimed Sarah and Emma. Some wounds were too fresh for words, but they talked around them, building a picture of lives lived and lost. When Eliza finally went to bed, she felt wrung out but somehow lighter. Grief shared was still grief, but it weighed less than grief borne alone. The storm broke on the fourth day, revealing a world transformed. Snow covered everything in pristine white, smoothing the rough edges of the landscape. The sun returned, blindingly bright. Grant spent most of the day digging out, paths to the barn, to the outhouse, to the woodpile. Eliza helped where she could, though her lack of strength showed quickly. Still, she pushed through, determined to pull her weight. That evening, exhausted and sore, they collapsed at the table with coffee. "You're going to be hurting tomorrow," Grant observed. "I'm hurting now." Eliza flexed her hands, already feeling blisters forming. But it felt good. To do something physical, something that showed results. "You've been doing that all week, cooking, cleaning, mending. That's different. She struggled for words. "That's what's expected, what I'm supposed to do. But shoveling snow, that felt like my choice." Grant nodded slowly. "I understand that. The difference between obligation and decision." Exactly. They drank their coffee in comfortable silence. The ease between them had grown over the past days, built on shared meals and shared grief, and the simple act of surviving together. Eliza was starting to realize that Grant Holloway was a good man. Not perfect. He was gruff and private, and sometimes disappeared into his own head for hours. But he was honest and kind in a way that demanded nothing in return. It made her angry all over again at Calvin Moore, at the whole family. They'd meant this as punishment, as exile. They'd thrown her away like garbage, expecting her to suffer. Instead, she was learning to breathe again. "Grant," she said suddenly, "why did you really agree to this? The truth." He studied her over his coffee mug. "I told you, I needed the money." "That's part of it, but not all." A long pause. Then, "You're right." Grant set down his mug. "Sarah died 3 years ago last month. Emma a week after. I couldn't—" He swallowed hard. "I couldn't stay in the house we'd built. Couldn't look at Emma's toys, Sarah's dresses, so I sold most of it, moved up here, and tried to forget." "Did it work?" "No, but it let me function, let me wake up without wanting to die." He met her eyes. When Calvin's letter came, offering money to let a stranger stay for winter, my first instinct was to refuse. I came up here to be alone. But then I thought, maybe having someone else around would help. Someone who didn't know Sarah or Emma, who wouldn't pity me or tell me it was time to move on. "Someone as broken as you," Eliza said softly. "Yeah." Grant's smile was bitter. "Misery loves company and all that. Except you're not miserable. You're angry. Is there a difference? Big one. Misery gives up. Anger fights back. Eliza considered this. He was right. Beneath her grief, beneath the hurt, there was fury. At the Moors, at the injustice, at a world that punished women for things beyond their control. I am angry, she admitted. Furious, actually, but I don't know what to do with it. You'll figure it out. Grant stood and moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit snow. You've got time. 3 months until the pass clears. That's enough to decide what happens next. 3 months. It had seemed like an eternity when she arrived. Now, after only 2 weeks, it felt frighteningly short. What would she do come April? Where would she go? The questions pressed in, but Eliza pushed them away. Grant was right. She had time. For now, she just needed to survive, day by day, hour by hour if necessary. She could do that much. January bled into February, and Eliza found her rhythm. She woke with the dawn, started the fire in her room stove, dressed in layers against the cold. By the time she emerged, Grant had already fed the stock and was making coffee. They ate breakfast together, usually cornmeal mush or bacon and bread, then split up for the day's work. Eliza took over most of the household tasks, not because Grant demanded it, but because she was good at them, and they gave her purpose. She cooked meals that actually tasted good, mended clothes until they looked nearly new, organized supplies with systematic efficiency. In the afternoons, when Grant came in from checking the herd or cutting wood, they'd talk. Sometimes about nothing. Weather, supplies, the coyotes that howled at night. Sometimes about everything. Their pasts, their regrets, the futures they'd once imagined. Eliza learned that Grant had grown up in Texas, left home at 16 to escape a father who thought fists solved every problem. She learned he'd worked as a ranch hand, saved every penny, and bought his first 100 acres at 23. She learned he'd met Sarah at a barn dance, married her 2 months later, and never regretted the impulsive decision. Grant learned that Eliza had been an only child, raised by parents who valued appearances over everything else. He learned she'd been educated at a finishing school that taught her how to set a table but not how to think for herself. He learned she'd married Thomas because he was kind and safe, only to discover he was also brave and funny and everything she'd never expected. They learned each other's patterns, how Eliza went quiet when overwhelmed, how Grant disappeared into work when grief hit too hard. They learned to give each other space when needed, company when wanted. And slowly, carefully, they became something like friends. But friendship didn't erase the underlying tension. They were still strangers bound by circumstance, still damaged people trying not to damage each other further. And Eliza was still, technically, Grant's responsibility. The reminder came in mid-February when they ventured down the mountain to the small settlement of Pinecrest for supplies. The town was barely more than a dozen buildings clustered around a general store and saloon. Grant had warned Eliza it wasn't much, but she was still shocked by how rough and raw everything looked. They tied up the horses outside the store, and Grant offered his arm. "Best behavior," he said quietly. "These folks are good people, but they're suspicious of outsiders." Eliza took his arm, grateful for the support. Her legs were still shaky from the long ride. She'd never been much of a horsewoman. Inside the store, a heavy-set man with a magnificent beard looked up from his ledger. "Grant, didn't expect to see you until spring." "Ran low on coffee and flour." Grant nodded toward Eliza. "This is Mrs. Moore. She's staying at my place for the winter." The storekeeper's eyes sharpened with interest. "Is that right? Pleased to meet you, ma'am. Name's Horace Kemp." "Pleasure," Eliza murmured. They gathered supplies while Horace made conversation, fishing for information about who Eliza was and why she was at Grant's cabin. Grant deflected smoothly, but Eliza could feel the speculation building. As they were leaving, a woman in a blue dress intercepted them. She was young, pretty, with sharp eyes and a determined expression. "Grant Holloway," she said warmly. "Where have you been hiding?" "Mrs. Larson." Grant's tone was polite but cool. "Just getting supplies." The woman, Mrs. Larson, turned her attention to Eliza. "And who might this be?" "Mrs. Moore. She's staying with Grant for the winter," Mrs. Larson finished, her smile turning knowing. "Yes," Horace mentioned, "how unconventional." The judgment in her voice was crystal clear. Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral. Mrs. Moore is recently widowed, Grant said, his voice hardening. Her family asked me to provide temporary shelter, nothing unconventional about Christian charity. Of course not. Mrs. Larson's tone suggested she believed otherwise. Still, people will talk. A widow and a widower, alone in the mountains. Let them talk. Grant took Eliza's arm firmly. Good day, Mrs. Larson. He steered Eliza outside before she could respond. They loaded the supplies in tense silence. I'm sorry about that, Grant said as they rode out of town. Alice Larson is the worst gossip in 3 counties. She'll have us married and divorced by Sunday. Will it cause problems for you? Eliza asked. Having me there? I don't care what people think. But your reputation is already shot. Grant's laugh was humorless. I'm the hermit widower who can't move on. One more scandal won't make a difference. Eliza wanted to argue, but couldn't. She'd seen the way people looked at Grant in town, with pity mixed with unease, like he was a wounded animal that might turn violent. They rode in silence for a while, the horses picking their way carefully through the snow. For what it's worth, Eliza said eventually, I don't think you're a hermit, or unable to move on. I think you're surviving the only way you know how. Grant glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. Yeah, you too. It was enough. They didn't need to say more. But that night, lying in her narrow bed, Eliza thought about Mrs. Larson's knowing smile, about the scandal she was creating just by existing in Grant's space. She'd brought nothing but trouble to this man who'd shown her nothing but kindness. The Moores would love that, would consider it further proof of her corrupting influence. Eliza stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind, and made a decision. Come spring, she'd leave as planned. She'd find work somewhere somehow. She wouldn't become Grant's burden for longer than absolutely necessary. And she wouldn't let herself care what happened to him after she left. The second part was already failing. The decision to leave in spring should have made things easier. Instead, it made everything harder. Eliza found herself noticing things she'd tried to ignore. The way Grant's shoulders relaxed when he laughed at something she said. How he always made sure the fire in her room was laid before she woke. The careful distance he maintained, never touching her unless absolutely necessary, respecting boundaries she hadn't asked him to keep. He was a good man trying to do right by a stranger, and she was going to abandon him the moment the weather allowed. The guilt gnawed at her through late February and into March, even as the days slowly lengthened and the worst of the winter cold began to ease. One morning, Eliza woke to find the cabin unusually quiet. Grant's boots were gone from by the door, his coat missing from the peg. Through the window, she could see fresh tracks leading toward the valley. She made coffee and waited, trying not to worry. Grant often left early to check the herd, but something felt different today. Wrong. By mid-morning, he still hadn't returned. Eliza paced the cabin, her unease growing. What if he'd been hurt? What if his horse had thrown him, or he'd fallen through ice on the creek? She was pulling on Sarah's old coat, preparing to go look for him despite having no idea where to start, when the door finally opened. Grant stumbled inside, his face pale beneath the windburn, favoring his left side. What happened? Eliza rushed to him. Nothing, just a stupid mistake. But he winced as he shrugged off his coat, and Eliza saw blood seeping through his shirt. Sit down, now. She used the voice that had made servants jump back in Denver, and to her surprise, Grant obeyed. She unbuttoned his shirt carefully, revealing a long gash across his ribs, not deep enough to be life-threatening, but ugly and still bleeding. A steer spooked, Grant explained through gritted teeth. Caught me against a fence post, tore the skin, but nothing worse. You rode back like this? Eliza's hand shook as she fetched water and clean cloth. You could have bled out. I've had worse. That's not reassuring. She cleaned the wound as gently as possible, but Grant still hissed in pain. This needs stitches. I know, there's a needle and catgut in the medicine box, shelf above the... I know where it is. Eliza had organized every inch of this cabin over the past 2 months. She retrieved the supplies, her heart hammering. I've never done this before. First time for everything. Grant's attempt at humor fell flat. He was breathing too fast, pain and blood loss catching up to him. Eliza threaded the needle with trembling fingers. She'd sewn countless garments, mended endless tears in fabric. How different could skin be? Very different, it turned out. The needle resisted, and she had to force it through. Grant made no sound, but his knuckles went white, gripping the table edge. "I'm sorry," Eliza whispered, working as quickly as her shaking hands allowed. "I'm so sorry." "Not your fault, you're doing fine." She wasn't. The stitches were uneven, too large, nothing like the neat repairs she'd made to his shirts, but they held. By the time she tied off the last one, sweat was running down her back despite the cool cabin air. "There." She sat back, surveying her work. "It's not pretty, but it'll do." Grant's voice was rough. "Thank you." Eliza bandaged the wound with strips of clean linen, then helped him into a fresh shirt. The intimacy of it, dressing him like a child, seeing the scars that marked his torso from years of hard living, felt both wrong and strangely natural. "You need to rest," she said. "Can't. The cattle can wait." Eliza stood, hands on hips. "You're no good to them if you collapse from blood loss. Rest." "That's an order." Grant actually smiled. "Yes, ma'am." She helped him to the chair by the fire, brought him coffee and the last of the bread. Then she did something that surprised them both. She sat on the floor beside his chair, unwilling to leave him alone. "You don't have to stay," Grant said after a moment. "I know." They sat in silence, watching the fire. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Another storm coming, probably. March was unpredictable in the mountains. "Can I ask you something?" Grant's voice was quiet, roughened by pain. "Of course." "What are you really planning to do in April?" Eliza's throat tightened. She'd avoided thinking too hard about specifics, preferring vague notions of California and teaching, but Grant deserved honesty. "I don't know," she admitted. "Find work somewhere. Maybe a town that needs a teacher like you said, or a hotel that needs help, something." "That's not a plan. That's a hope." "It's all I have." Grant was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his words came slowly, carefully. "You could stay." Eliza's heart lurched. "What?" "Not here. Not at the cabin. But in the valley. There's a schoolhouse in Pinecrest that hasn't had a proper teacher in 2 years. The children are growing up barely able to read. And down at the ranch, the main house is empty. You could—" He stopped, seeming to realize he was rushing. "I'm saying there are options, if you wanted them." "Grant." Eliza didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Your reputation is already damaged by having me here for winter. What do you think people would say if I stayed permanently?" "I don't care what people say." "You should. You have to live here. These are your neighbors, your community." "A community that includes Alice Larson and her poisoned tongue?" Grant shook his head. "I'd rather have one honest friend than 100 false neighbors." The word friend hung between them, weighted with meanings neither quite dared to examine. "I can't," Eliza said finally. "I can't stay and be your burden. You've done enough." "You're not a burden." Grant's voice was firm despite his pain. "You've made this winter bearable. Better than bearable. You've reminded me what it's like to have someone to talk to care about." "Grant, I'm not asking for anything you don't want to give," he interrupted. "I'm just saying the option exists. You want to teach? Teach. You want your own place. The ranch has 2 cabins for hired hands, both empty. You want to leave and never see me again? I'll give you money and supplies and wish you well." He met her eyes. "But don't run because you think you're saving me from scandal. Run because it's what you actually want." Eliza stared at him, this man who'd taken her in when she had nothing, who treated her with respect when everyone else saw her as shameful, the man who was offering her a future with no strings attached, asking nothing in return. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" Grant's expression softened. "Because you deserve a chance to choose your own life, and because—" He hesitated, then pushed forward. "Because I'd miss you if you left." There. I said it. Selfish, but true. The admission cracked something open in Eliza's chest. She'd spent months believing herself worthless, unmarketable, a burden to be shuffled around. And here was Grant, saying he'd miss her, simple and devastating. "I'd miss you too," she heard herself say. "I don't want to. It makes everything more complicated. But I would." "Then stay," Figure the rest out as we go. It was tempting, so tempting Eliza could taste it. A place to belong, work that mattered, a friend who actually seemed to value her company. Everything the Moores had denied her. But the specter of scandal loomed large. Grant might not care about his reputation, but Eliza had seen how quickly society could turn on women. One rumor, one accusation, and any chance at respectability would vanish. "Let me think about it," she said finally. "I have time." "You do?" Grant winced, shifting in the chair. "Though right now, what I need is to sleep before I fall over." Eliza helped him to his feet and across to the ladder leading to the loft where he slept. He made it up on his own, pride overriding pain, but she waited at the bottom until she heard him settle. Then she returned to the fire and tried to process what had just happened. Grant wanted her to stay. Not out of obligation or charity, but because he enjoyed her company. Because she'd made his life better somehow. The idea was foreign and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Eliza pulled her knees to her chest, staring into the flames. What did she want? Really want, beneath the fear and shame and uncertainty? She wanted to matter, to use her skills for something beyond managing a household for a man who'd never truly appreciated her. She wanted to wake up without that crushing weight of failure pressing down on her chest. She wanted to stop running from grief and start building something new. And yes, if she was honest, she wanted to stay near Grant. Not because she needed him, but because his steady presence had become important, necessary even. But wanting wasn't the same as having. Life had taught her that lesson well. The storm that had been threatening finally arrived that night, rattling the cabin with fierce winds. Eliza checked on Grant twice, finding him sleeping fitfully, fever starting to bloom from the wound. She cooled his face with damp cloths, changed his bandage, and tried not to panic. By morning, the fever had broken. Grant woke weak but clear-eyed, grateful for the soup she'd prepared. "You didn't have to nurse me all night," he said, but there was warmth in his voice. "Yes, I did." Eliza sat on the edge of the loft, a position that would have been scandalous anywhere but here. "You took care of me when I arrived half-frozen and full of pride. Fair's fair. I didn't do anything special. You saw me as human. That was everything." Grant held her gaze, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or recognition of the bond that had formed over these winter months, built on shared loss and tentative hope. "Eliza," he said carefully, "I meant what I said yesterday, about staying, but I need you to know I'm not looking for a replacement, for Sarah. I know. And I'm not expecting anything. No obligations, no—" "I know," Eliza repeated, touched that he felt the need to clarify. "You're offering friendship and opportunity. Nothing more." "Right, good." He looked relieved. "I just didn't want there to be confusion." "There isn't." But that wasn't entirely true, because as Eliza climbed back down the ladder and returned to her own room, she had to acknowledge the complicated tangle of feelings Grant inspired. Gratitude, certainly. Respect. Trust. And underneath it all, something warmer, something that scared her. She wasn't ready to examine it too closely. Wasn't ready to name it or give it space to grow. For now, friendship was enough. More than enough. The days that followed fell into a new pattern. Grant recovered slowly, frustrated by his forced inactivity. Eliza took over more of the outdoor work, learning to feed the cattle and chickens, to chop wood and carry water. Her hands blistered and her muscles ached, but she felt stronger, more capable. "You're a natural," Grant observed one afternoon, watching her split kindling with improving accuracy. "Hardly, but I'm learning." Eliza set down the axe, flexing her sore fingers. "There's satisfaction in physical work, in seeing immediate results. That's what I've always loved about ranching. You fix a fence, it's fixed. You feed stock, they're fed. None of the complicated mess of people and expectations." Eliza understood that impulse toward simplicity. But she also knew that running from complexity didn't make it disappear. "What happened?" she asked. "After Sarah and Emma died? How did people react?" Grant's expression closed off. The usual. Sympathy, then frustration when I didn't bounce back fast enough. Women brought casseroles and hints that I should remarry. Men suggested I sell the ranch and move on. He picked up a piece of wood, turning it in his hands. Nobody understood that I couldn't just replace them, that grieving isn't something you get over like a cold. The Moores were the same, Eliza said quietly. 2 months after Thomas died, Calvin told me it was time to stop moping and make myself useful, as if grief had a schedule. That's when they sent you here? That's when I stopped pretending to be grateful. Eliza sat on the chopping block. Calvin wanted me to marry his business partner, a man twice my age who'd already buried 2 wives. He presented it as charity, giving me security. But really, it was about controlling me, about making sure I didn't embarrass the family. Grant's jaw tightened. You said no. I said hell no. A bitter laugh escaped her. I'd never cursed before that moment. You should have seen Calvin's face. He turned purple. Good. He called me ungrateful, selfish, said I was spitting on Thomas's memory by refusing an honorable offer. Eliza's hands curled into fists. That's when I knew I had to leave. But before I could figure out how, Calvin made the decision for me. Told me I was being sent to recover my senses in the country. I didn't know where or with whom until Davy dumped me here. And you thought I was part of the punishment. I thought you'd be another man trying to control me, yes. Eliza met his eyes. I was wrong. You're the first person in a long time to treat me like an equal. You are my equal. Grant said it simply, like it was obvious. Probably my better in most ways. The sincerity in his voice made Eliza's chest tight. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe she had value beyond what men like Calvin decided. Tell me about the ranch, she said, needing to change the subject. The one down in the valley. Grant's expression shifted, brightening slightly. It's not much yet. 200 acres, about half cleared for grazing. The house needs work. Sarah and I were fixing it up when, he swallowed, when she got sick. After, I couldn't bring myself to finish, moved up here instead. Do you want to go back? Someday. Maybe. He looked at her carefully. Would be easier with help. Grant, I'm not proposing, he said quickly. I'm stating facts. Ranch that size needs at least 2 people to run properly. I've been managing alone, but barely. And the house has space, separate rooms, complete privacy. I'm just saying, if you decided to teach in Pinecrest, you'd need somewhere to live. Might as well be useful to both of us. Right? It was logical, practical. Exactly the kind of arrangement that would have made sense to the old Eliza, who'd been trained to consider every angle. But it was also dangerous. Living that close to Grant, working alongside him daily, it would blur lines that were already fuzzy. And if anyone found out, if the scandal grew, people would never accept it, Eliza said. A widow and widower living under the same roof, unmarried, they'd run me out of town. Let them try. Grant's voice went hard. I own that land free and clear. Nobody dictates who lives on it but me. But the children, if I'm teaching, their parents have to approve of me. One whiff of impropriety and they'll pull their kids out. Then we get married. The words dropped like stones into water, rippling out in widening circles of shock. Eliza stared at him. What? Grant looked equally surprised by his own suggestion. I mean, not a real marriage, a practical one. On paper only, to satisfy the gossips. Separate rooms, separate lives, just legal protection. For both of us. That's insane. Is it? Grant leaned forward, warming to the idea. Think about it. You need respectability to teach. I need help with the ranch. Marriage solves both problems. Marriage is sacred, Eliza protested, even as part of her mind raced ahead, examining the possibility. You don't just use it as a business arrangement. People do it all the time. Arranged marriages, marriages of convenience. They're common as dirt. Grant's expression was earnest now. This would be different, honest. We'd both know the terms going in. No deception, no false expectations. And when you meet someone you actually want to marry, what then? The question stopped him. Grant sat back, something unreadable crossing his face. I'm not looking for that. You might not be now, but eventually, no. His voice was firm. I had my chance at that kind of love. I'm not trying to recapture it. This would be different. Partnership, not romance. Eliza wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words, because part of her was actually considering it. A marriage in name only, providing security and purpose while avoiding the vulnerability of emotional entanglement. It was practical, smart, even. It was also the most ridiculous thing she'd ever heard. "I can't believe we're having this conversation," she said finally. "Neither can I." Grant ran a hand through his hair. "Forget I said anything. The fever must have scrambled my brains." "You're not feverish anymore." "Then I'm just crazy." But he was smiling slightly, the tension breaking. Eliza found herself smiling back despite the absurdity. "Completely insane." "We'd be good at it, though," Grant said, not quite letting the idea go. "The partnership part. We already work well together. We've known each other 2 months. Sarah and I knew each other 2 months before we married. For love," he added quickly. "Which this wouldn't be. But time doesn't guarantee anything. Character does." He had a point. Eliza had known Thomas for a year before their wedding, and she'd still discovered new facets of him throughout their marriage. Meanwhile, she felt like she knew Grant's character already. Steady, honest, kind in the ways that mattered. "This is insane," she repeated, but with less conviction. "Yeah." Grant stood, testing his healing side. "But think about it anyway. No pressure, no expectations. Just consider it." He headed outside, leaving Eliza alone with thoughts that spun in dizzying circles. Marriage of convenience. It sounded like something from a novel, not real life. But then again, her whole situation was surreal. Exiled widow, mountain cabin, cowboy with a tragic past. None of it felt real. Except it was. And she had decisions to make. The next week passed in careful normalcy. Grant didn't mention marriage again, and Eliza tried not to think about it. They fell back into their routine. Work, meals, evening conversations that ranged from shallow to deep. But the idea had taken root, and Eliza couldn't quite shake it. She started paying attention to practical details. The ranch house in the valley. How much work did it need? The school in Pinecrest. How many students? What resources existed? The logistics of a pretend marriage. Could they actually pull it off? Grant noticed her mental distraction but didn't push. He simply continued being himself, reliable, steady, occasionally funny, in a dry way that caught her off guard. One evening, as they played their usual game of checkers, Eliza finally spoke. "Tell me about the house. The real details. Not just that it needs work." Grant's hand paused over a game piece. "Thinking about my crazy proposal?" "Maybe. Probably. I don't know." Eliza moved her own piece, capturing one of his. "Just tell me." So he did. The house was 2 stories built from local timber with 4 bedrooms and a decent kitchen. The roof needed patching, several windows needed replacing, and the whole place needed a thorough cleaning and airing out. But the bones were good, the land was beautiful, and with effort, it could be a real home. "Sarah chose the spot," Grant said quietly, "by the creek, with mountains behind and valley in front. She said our children would need room to run." The grief in his voice was old but not diminished. Eliza ached for him, for the future he'd lost. "It sounds beautiful," she said honestly. "It could be again, with work." Grant captured 2 of her pieces in quick succession. "The school's about 3 miles down the road. Close enough to walk in good weather, ride in bad. The town's small but growing, families moving in, looking for fresh starts. Like me. Like both of us." Eliza studied the checkerboard, but her mind was elsewhere. A house by a creek. A school full of children needing education. A partnership built on mutual respect rather than romance. A chance to build something new from the ruins of her old life. It was terrifying. It was also the best offer she was likely to get. "If I agreed," she said slowly, "what would the terms be? Specifically?" Grant went very still. "You're serious?" "I'm considering. There's a difference." "Right." He took a breath, choosing words carefully. "Separate bedrooms, separate lives in private. In public, we act like a normal married couple, polite, friendly, cooperative. You teach, I run the ranch. Money kept separate but shared for household expenses. And most importantly, either of us can end it if it's not working. No trapped, no obligations beyond basic decency." "What about—" Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks but forced herself to continue. Physical expectations? None. Grant's voice was firm. This would be legal protection and partnership, nothing more. I'm not looking for. He trailed off, color rising in his own face. That's not what this is about. The awkwardness of the conversation was almost funny. Two adults, dancing around the realities of marriage while pretending it didn't matter. And if people find out it's not real, Eliza asked, they won't. As long as we're legally married and living respectably, what happens behind closed doors is our business. It made sense. Terrible, crazy, practical sense. Eliza moved another checker piece, though she'd lost track of the game. I need time to think. Of course. Take all the time you need. But time was running out. It was mid-March now, and the pass would clear in a few weeks. She needed to decide stay or go, safety or risk, the devil she knew versus the uncertainty beyond the mountains. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Eliza made lists in her head. Pros and cons, risks and benefits, fears and hopes. The exercise was meant to bring clarity, but instead, it highlighted how tangled everything had become. She trusted Grant. That was the core of it. She trusted him to keep his word, to treat her fairly, to not abuse whatever power a marriage would give him. That trust was rare and precious. But marriage, even a practical one, meant binding her life to his. What if he changed? What if she did? What if the arrangement that seemed sensible now became a prison later? Round and round her thoughts went, until exhaustion finally dragged her towards sleep. She woke to shouting. Eliza bolted upright, heart pounding. Through the cabin walls she heard Grant's voice, raised in anger, and another voice responding, male, unfamiliar, aggressive. She pulled on her robe and rushed to the main room. Grant stood in the open doorway, blocking someone's entrance. In the gray dawn light, Eliza could see a man on horseback, well-dressed, furious, unmistakably familiar even after 2 months apart. Calvin Moore had come to the mountains. You can't keep me from my own family, Calvin was saying, his voice sharp with authority. Eliza, get your things. We're leaving. Eliza's blood turned to ice. She stepped forward, pulling her robe tighter, and Calvin's eyes found her through the doorway. His expression twisted with disgust. Look at you, he spat. Barely dressed, living like some mountain whore. I knew sending you here was a mistake. Then you shouldn't have sent me. Eliza's voice came out steadier than she felt. You made your choice, Calvin. Now I'm making mine. You don't get to make choices. Calvin dismounted, his expensive boots sinking into the mud left by melting snow. You're a Moore. That means something, even if you've forgotten it. Grant shifted his weight, blocking more of the doorway. Mrs. Moore is a guest here, a welcome one, and she's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go. This doesn't concern you, Holloway. Calvin pulled a thick envelope from his coat. I paid you to keep her out of sight for winter. Winter's ending. Our agreement is done. The agreement was until April, Grant said coldly. It's March. Close enough. Calvin's hand moved to his hip where a pistol hung. I'm taking her back. By force if necessary. Eliza saw Grant's muscles tense, saw him calculating odds and distances. She stepped forward before anyone could do something stupid. Put the gun away, Calvin. You're not taking me anywhere. Her brother-in-law laughed, the sound ugly. You think you have a choice? You're penniless, friendless, living in sin with a stranger. You'll do what I say or face the consequences. What consequences? Eliza demanded. You've already exiled me. What's left to threaten? Your reputation, for one. I can spread word about what you've been doing up here. Make sure no decent person will employ you. Calvin's smile was cruel. Or I can be generous. Come back quietly, marry Edgar Pemberton like you should have months ago, and we'll forget this unfortunate episode. I'd rather die. The words hung in the cold air. Calvin's face darkened. That can be arranged too. Grant moved then, stepping fully outside. He didn't draw a weapon, but his presence was threat enough. He was taller than Calvin, harder, shaped by years of physical labor and loss. You need to leave, Grant said quietly. Right now. Or what? You'll shoot me? In front of witnesses? Calvin gestured behind him, and for the first time Eliza noticed 2 other men on horseback, hanging back but clearly hired muscle. I brought insurance this time. Then they can witness you trespassing on private land after making threats. Grant's voice never rose, but ice ran through it. Leave. Don't come back. If Mrs. Moore wants to contact you, she knows how. Calvin stared at Grant, then at Eliza, his expression calculating. She could see him weighing options, considering how far he could push. This isn't over, he said finally. The family has rights, legal rights to ensure Thomas's widow is properly cared for. I don't need your care, Eliza said. I never did. You'll change your mind when reality sets in, when Holloway here gets tired of his charity case and tosses you out. Calvin swung back onto his horse. I'll be staying in Pinecrest. You have 1 week to come to your senses. After that, things get difficult. He wheeled his horse around and rode off, his hired men following. The sound of hoofbeats faded slowly, swallowed by the forest. Eliza realized she was shaking. Grant turned to her, his expression tight with controlled fury. Are you all right? She wanted to say yes, wanted to be strong and unaffected. Instead, her knees buckled. Grant caught her before she fell, supporting her weight easily. Inside. Now. He guided her to the chair by the fire, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Eliza's teeth chattered despite the warmth. He's going to ruin everything, she said. Everything I was starting to hope for. No, he's not. Grant crouched in front of her, his hands steady on her shoulders. Listen to me. Calvin Moore is a bully. Bullies win when you're alone and scared. But you're not alone anymore. He has money, power. Those men are hired thugs who won't risk their necks for a family squabble. Grant's eyes were fierce, and his threats are hollow. You're not his property. The law might not favor women much, but even it has limits. Eliza wanted to believe him, but she'd seen what the Moores could do when crossed. They had connections, influence, enough money to make problems disappear. What if he tells everyone about us? The words came out small. About me living here unchaperoned. He could destroy any chance I have at teaching. Grant was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. He could, if we give him the ammunition. What do you mean? I mean my offer still stands. Marriage, legal, binding, respectable. Grant met her eyes. If we're married, Calvin has no leverage. You're no longer his concern or his family's. You're mine. Yours. The word tasted strange. My wife, my partner, my equal. Grant squeezed her shoulders gently. I know it's fast, I know you need time to think, but Calvin just moved up the timeline. He was right. Everything had changed in the span of 10 minutes. The luxury of waiting until April, of carefully weighing options, Calvin had stolen that. Now she had to choose quickly or risk losing everything. Marry Grant and gain legal protection, respectability, a future. Or refuse and face Calvin's wrath, his threats, his determination to control her. I need to think, Eliza said. Just for a few hours, please. Take all the time you need. Grant stood, moving to the window to watch for Calvin's return. But know this, whatever you decide, I'm not letting him take you. Even if you refuse to marry me, even if you choose to leave come April, you're safe here until then. I give you my word. The promise settled something in Eliza's chest. Grant meant it. He'd stand between her and Calvin, consequences be damned. That kind of loyalty was rare, precious, and it tipped the scales. Ask me again, she said quietly. Grant turned from the window. What? Ask me again, properly. Understanding dawned in his eyes. He crossed the room, knelt on one knee in front of her chair. It was formal, almost courtly, absurd given the circumstances, and yet somehow perfect. Eliza Moore, Grant said, his voice steady. Will you marry me? Not for love, not for romance, but for partnership and protection and mutual survival. Will you take a chance on building something new from the wreckage of our old lives? Eliza looked at him. This man who'd saved her, sheltered her, treated her like an equal when the world insisted she was worthless. This man offering everything he had and asking for nothing but honest work in return. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Grant's expression shifted through surprise to relief to something warmer. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. A shaky laugh escaped her. We're both crazy. Completely. Grant stood, offered his hand. But we'll be crazy together. Eliza took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. They stood close, hands clasped, and for a moment the enormity of the decision crashed over her. She was getting married, again, to a man she'd known for 2 months. A practical arrangement, yes, but still binding, still permanent in ways that terrified her. "We should do it today," Grant said, "before Calvin can interfere." "Today?" Eliza's voice squeaked. "That's impossible. We need a license, a minister. Pinecrest has both. Judge Morrison can marry us and file the papers same day." Grant was already moving, planning. "We ride down this morning, take care of the legalities, ride back before dark. But people will ask questions. Why the rush? Why us? Let them ask. We'll tell the truth. We want to be married, so we're getting married." Grant paused, looking at her carefully. "Unless you're having second thoughts." Eliza took a breath. Second thoughts, third thoughts. 1,000 doubts crowded her mind, but beneath them all was a core of certainty. This was right. Insane, but right. "No second thoughts," she said. "Let's do it." They prepared quickly. Eliza changed into her best dress, dark blue wool, respectable and warm. Grant shaved and put on his cleanest shirt. Within an hour, they were riding down the mountain trail, the sun climbing higher in a cloudless sky. The ride to Pinecrest took 3 hours. They didn't talk much, both lost in their own thoughts. Eliza's mind spun with logistics and fears. What if the judge refused to marry them? What if Calvin had already spread poison through the town? What if this whole plan collapsed before it even began? But Grant seemed calm, certain. His steadiness helped quiet some of her panic. They reached Pinecrest around noon. The little town was busier than Eliza's first visit, with wagons and horses crowding the main street. People stared as they rode past, curiosity playing on their faces. "Let them look," Grant murmured. "By tonight, they'll have plenty to talk about." Judge Morrison's office was above the general store, accessible by outside stairs. Grant helped Eliza dismount, then tied both horses securely. "Ready?" he asked. "No, but let's go anyway." The judge was a portly man in his 60s with kind eyes and a politician's practiced smile. He looked up from his paperwork as they entered. "Grant Holloway, haven't seen you in months. What brings you to town?" His gaze shifted to Eliza. "And with company, I see." "Judge Morrison, this is Mrs. Eliza Moore. She's been staying at my cabin for the winter." Grant's voice was formal. "We're here to get married." The judge's eyebrows shot up. "Married? Well, that's wonderful news. Congratulations to you both." But his tone held questions, and Eliza could see him fitting pieces together. The widow who'd shown up in February, living unchaperoned with the hermit rancher, now suddenly getting married. "We'll need a license," Grant continued, "and if you're available, we'd like the ceremony performed today." "Today?" Judge Morrison set down his pen. "That's quite sudden. We see no reason to wait." Grant's expression was neutral, but his hand found Eliza's, squeezing gently. A reminder that they were in this together. The judge studied them both for a long moment. Eliza forced herself to meet his gaze, to project confidence she didn't quite feel. "Well," Morrison said finally, "love waits for no man, as they say. I can perform the ceremony this afternoon, soon as the paperwork's filed. You'll need 2 witnesses." "Can we hire some?" Eliza asked. "We don't know many people in town." "Horace Kemp from the store will do it for $1, and his wife, probably. They've witnessed dozens of weddings." The judge pulled out forms, began writing. "Names and ages?" They provided the information, answered questions about prior marriages and legal residence. The whole process felt surreal, like Eliza was watching someone else's life unfold. Within an hour, the license was prepared. Judge Morrison sent for the Kemps, who arrived curious and delighted to be part of unexpected drama. "A wedding!" Mrs. Kemp exclaimed. "Oh, how lovely, and so romantic, eloping like this." "We're not eloping," Grant said firmly. "We're getting married legally and properly, just privately." Of course. But Mrs. Kemp's eyes sparkled with gossip potential. The ceremony was brief and businesslike. Judge Morrison read the legal requirements, asked them each in turn if they took the other as lawful spouse. Grant's "I do" was strong and clear. Eliza's voice shook slightly, but she got the words out. By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you man and wife. Morrison beamed. You may kiss the bride. Eliza's heart lurched. She'd been so focused on the legalities that she'd forgotten this part. Grant looked equally caught off guard. They leaned in awkwardly, lips meeting in a brief, chaste press. It was nothing like the passionate kisses she'd shared with Thomas. This was formal, perfunctory, two people fulfilling an obligation. But Grant's lips were warm, and the contact sent unexpected warmth through her. They pulled apart quickly. The Kemps applauded. Judge Morrison presented them with a marriage certificate, official and binding. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Holloway. Mrs. Holloway. The name settled over Eliza like a coat that didn't quite fit. She was married again, to a different man, in a different life, for completely different reasons. They paid the fees, thanked the judge and witnesses, and escaped to the street. Eliza's head spun. We should get supplies while we're here, Grant said, his voice carefully normal. Flour, coffee, whatever else we need. All right. They walked to the general store, and Eliza could feel eyes following them. Word of the hasty wedding would spread fast. By tomorrow, the whole county would know. Inside the store, Horace Kemp had clearly rushed ahead to spread the news. Customers turned to stare, whispering behind their hands. Grant ignored them, selecting supplies with methodical efficiency. Eliza tried to do the same, but her hands trembled as she chose fabric for new curtains, seeds for a kitchen garden. A kitchen garden at the ranch house. Her house now, legally. The reality kept hitting in waves. They were loading supplies onto the horses when Alice Larson appeared, her expression a mix of shock and vindictive satisfaction. Well, well, she said. Mrs. Moore, or should I say Mrs. Holloway now? Mrs. Holloway is fine, Eliza said, lifting her chin. How convenient. A hasty marriage to save your reputation. Alice's smile was sharp. Though I suppose it's better than living in sin. Barely. Mrs. Larson, Grant's voice cut like a blade. My wife and I have legal business in town, if you'll excuse us. Your wife, Alice laughed. 2 months ago, she was a scandalous widow. Now she's your wife. People will talk, Grant. Let them. Grant secured the last bundle. We're not concerned with gossip. You should be, especially if she plans to teach our children. Alice turned to Eliza. You're planning to teach, aren't you? I heard you asking about the school. Eliza's stomach dropped. She hadn't officially applied yet, hadn't even spoken to anyone about it beyond Grant, but Alice had clearly been listening, gathering ammunition. If the town needs a teacher, I'm qualified, Eliza said. Qualified? Alice's eyebrows rose. A woman who lived unmarried with a man for months? Who married him in suspicious haste? That's the example you want for our children? We're married now, Grant said, his voice hard. Legally and properly. Her reputation is spotless. Is it? Alice looked between them. Or did you marry to hide something? Perhaps she's already carrying a... Enough! Grant stepped forward, and Alice actually retreated. You've made your insinuations. Now leave us alone. Alice's expression turned ugly. You'll regret this, both of you. This town doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive. She swept away, leaving a poisonous silence in her wake. Eliza felt sick. It was worse than she'd imagined. The gossip, the accusations, the automatic assumption of guilt. And Alice Larson was just the beginning. How many others shared her views? Don't listen to her, Grant said quietly. She's a bitter woman looking for targets. She's influential. If she turns people against me, then we'll find another way. Grant helped her onto her horse. Come on, let's go home. Home. The ranch house she'd never seen, that would now legally be hers. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like a trap closing. They rode in silence, leaving Pinecrest behind. But Eliza could feel the town's judgment following them, heavy as storm clouds. Halfway back to the cabin, they stopped to rest the horses. Eliza dismounted on shaky legs, her mind still reeling. I'm sorry, Grant said. For Alice, for all of it. I knew there'd be talk, but I didn't think she'd be so vicious. She called me a whore and everything but words. Eliza's voice cracked. And she'll tell everyone I married you because I'm pregnant. They'll count months waiting for proof. Which won't come, and they'll eventually realize they were wrong. Will they? Or will they just decide I lost the baby and still judge me? Eliza wrapped her arms around herself. This is a mistake. We should annul it before it gets worse. No. Grant's voice was firm. We did this for good reasons. Protection, partnership, a future. Those reasons haven't changed. But if I can't teach, if no one will accept me, then we build something else. Grant moved closer. Eliza, listen to me. I've lived in this county for 8 years. I know these people. Some are kind, some are cruel, most are somewhere in between. But they respect strength, conviction. If we show we're not ashamed, if we hold our ground, they'll come around. You're too optimistic. Maybe, but I'd rather hope than give up. He touched her shoulder gently. We're married now. For better or worse, as they say. Let's try to make it better. Eliza wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her insides, whispering that she'd just traded one prison for another. They reached the cabin as the sun started its descent. Grant tended the horses while Eliza went inside, still wearing her best dress, still feeling the weight of the gold band Grant had placed on her finger during the ceremony. She was married. The third time today, this realization hit, and it still felt unreal. Grant came in carrying supplies. He set them down carefully, then turned to face her. We should talk about living arrangements, he said. Now that we're married. Eliza's heart lurched. I thought we agreed. We did. Separate rooms, separate lives. Grant held up a hand. I'm not changing the terms, but the ranch house has 4 bedrooms. You should choose which one you want, before we move down there. When are we moving? Soon. A week, maybe 2. Give me time to patch the roof and make sure the place is livable. He paused. Unless you want to stay up here longer? Eliza looked around the cabin that had been her refuge for 2 months. It felt safe, familiar, but it was also isolated, cut off. The ranch house meant being closer to town, to people, to whatever life she was trying to build. No, she said. Let's move soon. Start fresh. All right. Grant moved to the stove, starting coffee. I know this day didn't go how you hoped. I didn't know what to hope for. Fair enough. He poured 2 cups, handed her one. But for what it's worth, I'm glad we did this. I think it was the right choice. Eliza wanted to share his certainty. Instead, all she felt was exhaustion and doubt. That night, lying alone in her small room for possibly the last time, Eliza stared at the ceiling and tried to process everything. She was Mrs. Grant Holloway now. A married woman with a home, a future, a partner who promised respect and equality. So why did she feel like she'd just signed away her freedom? Because that's what marriage meant for women, the bitter voice in her head whispered. Legal ownership, however kindly disguised. Grant might be better than most men, but he was still a man, and she'd just given him legal authority over her life. Eliza twisted the gold band on her finger. It was simple, plain, nothing like the ornate ring Thomas had given her, but it represented the same thing, a bond she couldn't easily break. She'd thought she was choosing freedom. Instead, she'd chosen a different kind of cage. Or maybe she was wrong. Maybe Grant would keep his word. Maybe this partnership would actually work. Only time would tell. The next morning, Grant was already working when Eliza emerged. He'd started repairs on a wagon, clearly preparing for the move to the ranch. Morning, he said, looking up. Coffee's hot. Thank you. Eliza poured herself a cup, oddly relieved that things felt normal. Whatever else had changed, their daily routine remained. They worked through the morning, Grant on the wagon, Eliza sorting belongings and packing what they'd need to take. It was companionable, comfortable, and that eased some of her anxiety. Around midday, a rider appeared on the trail. Eliza's heart sank, expecting Calvin. But it was a young man she didn't recognize, wearing a deputy's badge. Grant set down his tools and walked out to meet him. Eliza followed, worry tight in her chest. Mr. Holloway, the deputy said, I'm Deputy Barnes from Pinecrest. I need to speak with you about a complaint that's been filed. What kind of complaint? Moral turpitude? Corruption of a widow? Unlawful cohabitation? Barnes looked uncomfortable. Mr. Calvin Moore has filed formal charges. Says you've been holding his sister-in-law against her will, forcing her into marriage to cover your crimes. Eliza's vision blurred with rage. That's a lie. All of it. Ma'am, I'm just here to deliver the complaint and summons. You'll both need to appear before Judge Morrison next week to answer the charges. This is horseshit, Grant said flatly. We're legally married. The judge performed the ceremony himself yesterday. I know, sir, but Mr. Moore claims the marriage was coerced, that you threatened Mrs. Holloway, into compliance. Barnes pulled papers from his saddlebag. Like I said, I'm just the messenger. You'll have your chance to respond in court. He handed over the summons and rode off quickly, clearly not wanting to linger. Grant stood holding the papers, his expression dark as thunderclouds. Calvin's not giving up. He never does. Eliza felt cold despite the mild day. He'll drag this out, make it as ugly as possible. Try to prove I'm incompetent or corrupted or whatever will give him control. He won't win. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Grant looked at her, his eyes fierce. Because we have the truth on our side, and because I'm not letting him take you. Not now, not ever. The vehemence in his voice startled Eliza. This wasn't just about practicality anymore. Grant was genuinely angry, genuinely protective. It should have comforted her. Instead, it scared her. Because protection could become possession so easily, and possession was exactly what she'd been trying to escape. Over the next few days, the situation deteriorated. Word of the charges spread through the county. People who'd been merely curious became openly hostile. When Eliza ventured into Pinecrest for supplies, she was met with cold stares and whispered insults. Someone painted "whore" on the side of the store where everyone could see it. The marshal cleaned it off, but the message was clear. Then the windows started breaking. The first time, Eliza and Grant were at the ranch house, assessing repairs needed. They returned to find the cabin's main window shattered, glass scattered across the floor. Probably kids, Grant said, but his voice was tight. The second time, they were both asleep. The crash woke them, and Grant grabbed his rifle before racing outside. But whoever had thrown the rock was long gone. The third time, there was a note wrapped around the rock. Sinners go home. Where exactly is home supposed to be? Eliza asked bitterly, staring at the message. They drove me here. Now they want me gone. Where am I supposed to go? Grant had no answer. He boarded up the broken window and sat watch through the night, rifle across his lap. Eliza sat with him, neither sleeping. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken fears. We could leave, Grant said finally. Sell the ranch, start over somewhere else. California, maybe, or Oregon. Running. Strategic retreat. But his smile was wan. I won't lie, Eliza. This is worse than I expected. I thought people would talk, but I didn't think they'd turn violent. Calvin's behind it, paying people to harass us, probably. Eliza's hands curled into fists. He wants me to break, to come crawling back. Will you? Never. Grant nodded. Then we stand and fight, together. The word together settled something in Eliza's chest. Whatever mistakes she'd made, whatever uncertainty she felt, Grant was beside her. That counted for something. But standing and fighting was easier said than done. As the week wore on and the court date approached, the harassment escalated. Someone killed 2 of Grant's chickens and left them on the doorstep. Someone cut a section of fence, letting cattle wander. Someone started a rumor that Eliza was a con artist who tricked Grant into marriage to steal his ranch. The constant pressure wore on both of them. Grant grew quieter, grimmer. Eliza found herself jumping at every sound, sleeping poorly, eating less. The night before the court date, they sat at the table, neither able to find words. The future that had seemed possible just days ago now felt like a fantasy. What if we lose? Eliza asked finally. What if the judge believes Calvin? Then we appeal. Fight it legally. Grant's voice was tired. But we won't lose. Morrison knows Calvin's type. He won't be fooled. Eliza wanted to believe him, but she'd learned that justice and fairness weren't always the same thing. Grant, she said quietly, if it comes down to it, if staying married to me costs you everything, you should end it. Annul the marriage. Send me away. Save yourself. His head snapped up. No. Be practical. You have a ranch, a life here. You're my wife. Grant reached across the table, taking her hand. Not in romance, not in passion, but in partnership and promise. I made vows yesterday. I meant them. Even if it destroys you? Even then. The simple certainty in his voice made Eliza's eyes burn. No one had ever fought for her like this. No one had ever considered her worth the cost. I don't know what I did to deserve you, she whispered. You survived, Grant said simply. You kept going when everything told you to quit. That's worth fighting for. They sat in silence, hands clasped across the table, drawing strength from each other. Tomorrow they'd face Calvin and his accusations. Tomorrow they'd fight for the fragile future they'd built. But tonight they had this moment, this partnership, this unexpected alliance that had grown from exile into something precious. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Morning came too quickly, bringing with it a bright spring sky that mocked the darkness Eliza felt inside. She dressed in her most respectable outfit, the dark blue wool again, her hair pinned severely back, and tried to quiet the trembling in her hands. Grant was already outside, hitching the horses to the wagon. His face was set in hard lines, but when he caught sight of her, his expression softened slightly. Ready? He asked. No, but let's go anyway. The ride to Pinecrest felt endless and too short all at once. Eliza's stomach churned with each mile, imagining what awaited them. Calvin's smug face, the judge's potential judgment, the town's collective condemnation. Every worst possibility played through her mind in vivid detail. Grant seemed to sense her spiraling thoughts. Whatever happens, he said quietly, you tell the truth. Simple and direct. Don't let Calvin's lawyer twist your words. He has a lawyer? Probably brought one from Denver. That's how men like him operate. Grant's jaw tightened. But truth is truth. It doesn't need fancy language. Eliza wished she had his faith in justice. Her experience suggested that truth mattered far less than money and influence. Pinecrest's main street was crowded when they arrived. Word had spread about the hearing, and it seemed half the county had turned out to watch the spectacle. People lined the boardwalks, whispering behind their hands as Grant helped Eliza down from the wagon. She held her head high, refusing to show the fear crawling up her spine. Judge Morrison's courtroom was above the general store, accessed by the same outside stairs they'd climbed for their wedding. The irony wasn't lost on Eliza, married and tried in the same building less than a week apart. Inside, the room was already packed. Calvin sat at a front table with a sharp-dressed man who could only be his lawyer. His hired men lurked in the back, along with Alice Larson and several other town gossips. The air hummed with anticipation. Grant led Eliza to the opposite table. They sat, and he placed his hand over hers briefly, a reminder that she wasn't alone. Judge Morrison entered, his expression grave. This court is now in session. We're here to address charges brought by Mr. Calvin Moore against Mr. Grant Holloway and Mrs. Eliza Holloway, née Moore. He looked over his spectacles at Calvin. Mr. Moore, you've made serious accusations, kidnapping, coercion, fraud. I hope you have evidence to support them. Calvin stood, letting his lawyer do the talking. The man was smooth, practiced, with a voice that carried authority. Your Honor, my client's sister-in-law was sent to Mr. Holloway's care while grieving her late husband. She was vulnerable, distraught, not in her right mind. Mr. Holloway took advantage of her state, isolated her in the mountains, and ultimately coerced her into a hasty marriage to legitimize his improper conduct. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to remain still. That's a serious charge, Judge Morrison said. What evidence do you have? The timeline itself, Your Honor. Mrs. Moore arrived at Mr. Holloway's cabin in January. They lived alone, unchaperoned, for 2 months. Then, mere days after my client arrived to check on his sister-in-law's welfare, they suddenly married. The implication is clear. The implication, Grant said, standing abruptly, is that we're adults who made a decision, nothing more. Mr. Holloway, you'll have your turn to speak, Morrison said. Sit down. Grant sat, but his hands were clenched on the table. Calvin's lawyer continued. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have testimony from townspeople who witnessed Mrs. Moore's distressed state, her inappropriate dress, her obvious reluctance when first brought to Pinecrest. She was a prisoner in all but name. That's a lie, Eliza said, unable to stay silent. Morrison looked at her. Mrs. Holloway, you'll have a chance to testify. For now, let Mr. Moore's representative finish. The lawyer painted a picture of Grant as a predator and Eliza as a helpless victim. He called Alice Larson to the stand, who testified with relish about seeing Eliza in men's clothing, looking exhausted and frightened. He called Davy, the man who'd delivered Eliza to the cabin, who claimed she'd begged him not to leave her there. Each lie built on the last, creating a narrative that had just enough truth twisted through it to sound plausible. Eliza's nails dug into her palms. She wanted to scream, to shout down every false word, but Grant's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. Wait, the gesture said. Your turn will come. Finally, the lawyer rested his case. Judge Morrison turned to Grant. Mr. Holloway, you've heard the charges. How do you respond? Grant stood, and Eliza was struck by how calm he appeared, like a man who knew his own truth and felt no need to embellish it. Your Honor, I won't pretend this situation is conventional. It's not. Mrs. Moore, Eliza, came to my cabin because her family sent her there. I agreed to let her stay because I needed the money Mr. Moore offered. That's the truth. Gasps and whispers. Grant ignored them. But the rest of what's been said is fiction. Eliza was never a prisoner. She was free to leave whenever she wanted. I told her that the first day. As for our marriage, we made that decision together, as equals, for practical reasons that served us both. Practical reasons? The lawyer interjected. What kind of practical reasons justify such haste? The kind where a woman needs legal protection from a family trying to control her, and a man needs help running a ranch he can barely manage alone. Grant's voice was steady. We're partners, Your Honor. Nothing sinister, nothing improper, just two people trying to survive. Morrison nodded slowly. Mrs. Holloway, I'd like to hear from you directly. Did Mr. Holloway coerce you into marriage? Eliza stood on shaking legs, every eye in the room fixed on her, judging, weighing, ready to condemn. No, Your Honor, he didn't coerce me. He offered me a choice, the first real choice I'd had in months. Her voice grew stronger. My late husband's family decided I was worthless because I didn't produce an heir. They blamed me for his death, for my grief, for existing. They sent me away to punish me, to break me, to make me desperate enough to accept whatever scraps they threw. She looked directly at Calvin, letting all her anger and hurt show. But Grant didn't try to break me. He treated me like a human being. He offered work, not charity, respect, not pity. And yes, when Calvin showed up threatening to drag me back, we decided to marry. Not because Grant forced me, but because I chose to. Because marrying him meant freedom, and going back to Denver meant slavery. Slavery? Calvin's lawyer scoffed. Dramatic language, Mrs. Holloway. Is it? Eliza turned to him. What would you call forcing a woman to marry against her will, denying her any say in her own future, treating her like property to be managed? Your family wanted to care for you. My family wanted to control me. There's a difference. Eliza looked at Judge Morrison. I married Grant of my own free will. I stand here today as his legal wife, his partner, and if that scandalizes people, so be it. I'd rather be scandalous and free than respectable and caged. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Morrison banged his gavel for order. Mr. Moore, he said, looking at Calvin, do you have any actual evidence of coercion, beyond timeline and speculation? Calvin stood, his face flushed. Your Honor, my brother's widow is clearly not in her right mind. Her emotional state, her wild accusations, surely this proves she needs family guidance. What it proves, Morrison said dryly, is that she's articulate and capable of defending herself, unlike the helpless victim your lawyer described. He shuffled papers. I've known Grant Holloway for years. He's a good man, if a private one, and I performed the marriage ceremony myself. Both parties were clear-minded and willing. They're hiding something, Alice Larson called out from the gallery. A hasty marriage always means, Mrs. Larson, one more outburst and you'll be removed, Morrison snapped. He turned back to Calvin. Unless you have concrete evidence of wrongdoing, witnesses to threats, proof of physical coercion, anything substantial, I'm dismissing these charges. But, Your Honor, The marriage is legal and binding. Mrs. Holloway is of sound mind and legal age. She's made her choice clear. Morrison's gavel came down. Charges dismissed. This court is adjourned. The crack of wood on wood was like thunder. For a moment, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. Calvin surged to his feet, his face purple with rage. This isn't over. I'll appeal. You'll do nothing, Morrison said firmly, unless you want me to charge you with harassment and filing false claims. Now get out of my courtroom. Grant stood, pulling Eliza up with him. They moved toward the door, but Calvin blocked their path. You think you've won? He hissed at Eliza. You've destroyed yourself. No one in this town will accept you. You'll be an outcast, a pariah. That ranch will fail, and when it does, you'll come crawling back. Never, Eliza said, her voice like steel. I'd rather starve than accept another moment of your poison. We'll see how long that pride lasts. Calvin's eyes were cold. You've made powerful enemies, Eliza. The more name carries weight. We'll make sure every door is closed to you. Then we'll build our own doors, Grant said quietly. He moved around Calvin, keeping Eliza close. Come on, let's go home. They pushed through the crowded courtroom and down the stairs. Outside, people had gathered, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Eliza felt their judgment like physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders. Someone spat at her feet as she passed. Someone else muttered, horror, just loud enough to hear. Grant's arm came around her waist, supporting and protective. Keep walking. Don't give them the satisfaction. They made it to the wagon. Grant helped her up, then climbed beside her and took the reins. The crowd parted reluctantly, letting them pass. As they left Pinecrest behind, Eliza finally let herself breathe. They'd won the legal battle. Morrison had dismissed the charges, validated their marriage, but the war was far from over. That was brutal, Grant said after a while. You held up well. Did I? Eliza's hands were still shaking. I feel like I'm going to be sick later, when we're home and safe. Grant glanced at her. What you said in there, about choosing freedom, that took courage. It took anger. I'm tired of being ashamed of things that aren't my fault. Eliza wrapped her arms around herself. But Calvin's right about one thing. We've made enemies. Real ones. We've also made our position clear. No more wondering what we are or why we married. It's out in the open now. And the whole town hates us for it. Grant was quiet for a moment. Not the whole town. Some, yes. Alice Larson and her ilk. But others were watching, listening. Some saw a woman standing up for herself and a man standing beside her. That means something. Eliza wanted to believe him, but the memory of that spitting, the muttered insults, the hostile faces, it was hard to find hope in any of it. They rode in silence until the cabin came into view. Home, Grant had called it. But it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a fortress under siege. As they unhitched the horses, a rider appeared on the trail. Eliza's heart sank, expecting more trouble. But it was Deputy Barnes, and he looked uncomfortable. Mr. Holloway, Mrs. Holloway, he said, dismounting. I'm sorry to bother you, but there's been an incident in town. What kind of incident? Grant asked, his voice wary. The schoolhouse. Someone broke in last night, destroyed all the books and supplies, left a message painted on the wall. Barnes pulled out a notebook, read reluctantly. No whores teaching our children. Eliza felt like she'd been punched. They think I did it? No, ma'am, we know you didn't. You were at the hearing all morning, but the message is clearly directed at you. Barnes shifted his weight. Marshall wanted me to warn you. Whoever did this is trying to make sure you can't teach, even if the position was offered. Which it won't be now, Eliza said bitterly. Not after this. I wouldn't be so sure. Barnes looked between them. See, the thing is, a lot of folks are angry about the vandalism. The school is for everyone's kids, not just those who agree with Alice Larson. And destroying books? That's serious. It's got people thinking about what's really happening here. What do you mean? Grant asked. I mean, some folks are starting to wonder if maybe the Moors and their allies are the problem, not you two. Barnes tucked away his notebook. It's just a few voices now, but they're getting louder. People saying live and let live, saying a woman's marriage is her own business. It was a small crack in the wall of hostility, but Eliza was afraid to hope. Does the marshal think they'll catch who did it? He's investigating, and between you and me, he's looking at Calvin Moore's hired men first. Barnes tipped his hat. Just wanted you to know, things might get worse before they get better, but they might actually get better. After he left, Eliza sat on the cabin steps trying to process everything. The hearing, the vandalism, the tiny possibility that not everyone had turned against them. Grant sat beside her. You know what this means? That we have enemies willing to destroy property to hurt us? That we're having an impact? That your speech in that courtroom reached some people? Grant looked out at the mountains. Change is messy. It makes people uncomfortable. But it happens anyway, if you're willing to stand firm. I don't feel firm, I feel terrified. Yeah, me too. Grant's honesty was oddly comforting. But we don't have to be brave all the time, just brave enough to keep going. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She kept seeing the hostile faces, hearing the insults, imagining what other damage Calvin's money could buy. Every sound outside made her jump, expecting rocks through windows, or worse. Around midnight, she gave up and went to the main room. Grant was there, sitting by the banked fire, his rifle across his knees. Couldn't sleep either? He asked. Every time I close my eyes, I see them, spitting, cursing. Eliza sat in the other chair. How do you bear it? The judgment, the hatred? I don't, mostly. I just ignore it and focus on what needs doing. Grant set the rifle aside. But I won't lie, today was hard. Hearing them twist everything, make us sound dirty and wrong, it got to me. Then why do you seem so calm? Because anger doesn't help right now. Strategy does. Grant leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Calvin's going to keep pushing. He spent money, risked his reputation by bringing charges. He can't back down without looking weak. So what do? We build, move to the ranch, fix it up, make it productive. You apply for the teaching position officially. We become part of the community, like it or not. Grant met her eyes. We stop hiding and start living like we have every right to be here. Because we do. It sounded impossible, but then again, everything about the past 3 months had seemed impossible. When do we move? Eliza asked. Tomorrow. No point waiting. Grant stood, offered his hand. Come on, you should try to sleep. Big day ahead. Eliza took his hand, let him pull her up. They stood close, hands still clasped, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or solidarity born of shared struggle. Grant, she said quietly, thank you for standing with me today, for not backing down when it would have been easier. Where else would I be? He squeezed her hand gently, then released it. We're partners. That means something. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the world didn't know about the darkness closing in. They loaded the wagon with everything they owned, which wasn't much. Grant's tools, Eliza's few possessions, basic supplies for setting up the ranch house. The cabin that had sheltered them through winter looked small and lonely as they prepared to leave. Strange, Eliza said, looking back at it. I hated this place when I arrived. Now I'm almost sad to go. It served its purpose. Grant secured the last bundle. Kept us alive through the worst of winter, but it's time to move forward. The ride down to the valley took most of the morning. The ranch house sat in a meadow beside a creek, exactly as Grant had described. 2 stories of weathered timber, surrounded by tall grass and wildflowers just starting to bloom. It was beautiful and completely neglected. Eliza climbed down from the wagon and surveyed their new home. Broken shutters, sagging porch, roof that clearly leaked. The yard was overgrown. The barn needed serious repairs, and she could see daylight through gaps in the walls. It's worse than I remembered, Grant admitted. Sorry. It's perfect, Eliza said, surprising herself. Because it's ours. And because fixing it gives us something to focus on besides town gossip. Grant's face brightened. Yeah? Yeah. Eliza picked up one of her bags. Show me inside. I want to choose my room. The interior was dusty and full of cobwebs, but Eliza could see the good bones beneath. A large kitchen with an actual stove, a sitting room with a real fireplace, stairs leading to 4 decent-sized bedrooms. With work, it could be a real home. Eliza chose the smallest bedroom, the one overlooking the creek. It felt right. Cozy, but independent. Hers without question. Grant took the largest room at the other end of the hall. Maximum privacy, minimum temptation for gossip. They spent the rest of the day cleaning and making the place livable. Grant patched the worst roof leaks while Eliza scrubbed floors and windows. By evening, they'd managed to make 2 bedrooms and the kitchen functional. They ate a simple dinner of beans and cornbread at the kitchen table, both exhausted but oddly satisfied. "First meal in our home," Grant observed. "Our home." Eliza tested the words. They felt strange but not wrong. "I never thought I'd have another one. After Thomas, after everything, home seemed like something from my past." "And now?" "Now it's something to build toward." She looked around the kitchen, seeing not what it was, but what it could be. "We'll make it work, won't we? The ranch, the teaching, all of it?" "We'll make it work or die trying." Grant raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. "To stubborn survival." Eliza clinked her cup against his. "To stubborn survival." The next few weeks were brutal. Grant worked dawn to dusk repairing buildings and tending cattle, while Eliza transformed the house from derelict to livable. They fell into bed each night too tired to think, only to wake and start again. But slowly, progress showed. The roof stopped leaking. The windows all had glass. The kitchen became functional, then actually pleasant. Eliza planted a garden, started chickens, made curtains from fabric she'd bought in Pinecrest, and through it all, the harassment continued. Someone cut their fence again, letting cattle wander. Someone left a dead cat on the porch. Whispers followed them whenever they went to town for supplies. But there were small victories too. The general store owner, Horace Kemp, started greeting them normally instead of with hostility. A few townspeople nodded in passing, if not quite friendly, then at least not openly hostile. And Deputy Barnes stopped by occasionally, ostensibly to check on them, but really to share that the investigation into the school vandalism was progressing. Then, 6 weeks after moving to the ranch, everything changed again. Eliza was in the garden when she heard horses approaching. Multiple riders, moving fast. Her heart jumped, expecting trouble. Grant emerged from the barn, rifle in hand, but when the riders came into view, he lowered the weapon slowly. It was Marshal Crawford, leading Calvin Moore and his 2 hired men. All 3 of the Moore party had their hands bound. "Mr. Holloway, Mrs. Holloway," Crawford called out. "Got something you should see." They walked out to meet him. Calvin's face was mottled with rage and humiliation. "Found these 3 breaking into your barn last night," Crawford explained. "Caught them red-handed with kerosene and matches. They were planning to burn you out." Eliza's blood went cold. "Burn the barn?" "With your cattle locked inside," Crawford confirmed grimly. "Would have destroyed your livelihood, maybe killed you if the fire spread to the house." Grant's expression went deadly. "Calvin, you've sunk low, but attempted murder?" "It wasn't murder," Calvin spat. "It was justice. You stole my family's property." "I'm not property," Eliza said, her voice shaking with fury. "I'm a human being, and you're so obsessed with controlling me that you were willing to kill for it." Crawford pulled out papers. "Mr. Moore is being charged with conspiracy to commit arson and attempted murder. His men are cooperating, gave full statements. Seems Mr. Moore's been behind most of the harassment you've suffered. Paid folks to vandalize the school, break your windows, all of it." "I want them prosecuted," Grant said, "fully." "That's the plan. Just needed you to identify them as the men who've been causing trouble." Crawford's expression was satisfied. "Mr. Moore also made some threats in front of witnesses when we arrested him. Detailed threats about what he'd do to you both. Judge Morrison will be very interested in those." Calvin's face went white as he realized his situation. "You can't prove anything. My lawyer." "Your lawyer is back in Denver, and even he can't explain away 3 witnesses and a confession." Crawford tipped his hat to Eliza and Grant. "You folks have a good evening. I'll keep you informed about the trial." They watched the marshal ride off with his prisoners. Eliza felt like her legs might give out. "It's over," she whispered. "Calvin's actually going to face consequences." "Looks like it." Grant's voice was tight with controlled emotion. "He pushed too far, got desperate, made mistakes. We could have died." The reality of it hit Eliza hard. If Crawford hadn't been watching, if they'd succeeded... Grant pulled her into his arms without thinking, and Eliza went without hesitating. They stood in the yard, holding each other while the enormity of what almost happened sank in. But we didn't die, Grant said into her hair. We're here. We're safe. And Calvin can't hurt us anymore. Eliza nodded against his chest, breathing in the scent of sawdust and honest sweat. Grant's embrace was solid, grounding, nothing like the panic swirling through her. After a moment, they pulled apart, both slightly awkward about the unexpected intimacy. Sorry, Grant said. Don't apologize. I needed that. Eliza managed a shaky smile. Partners hold each other up, right? Right. They went inside together, processing the news. Calvin arrested, charged with serious crimes, facing real prison time. The harassment would stop. The threats would end. They could actually breathe. That night, Eliza slept soundly for the first time in weeks. The morning after Calvin's arrest, Eliza woke to birdsong and sunlight streaming through her window. For the first time in months, the weight on her chest had lifted enough that she could breathe deeply without fear tightening around her ribs. She dressed and went downstairs to find Grant already making coffee, his movements easy and relaxed in a way she hadn't seen before. Sleep well? He asked. Better than I have in ages. Eliza accepted the cup he offered. It feels strange, peaceful. It does. Grant leaned against the counter. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to ride up with new threats. But no one will. Calvin's in jail. His hired men are cooperating to save themselves. It's really over. They stood in the kitchen, sipping coffee and letting that reality settle. The war they'd been fighting since March was done. Now they had to figure out what peace looked like. I'm going into town today, Eliza said suddenly. To the school board, to officially apply for the teaching position. Grant's eyebrows rose. You sure people might still let them try? Eliza set down her cup with determination. Calvin's arrest proves we were telling the truth all along, that we were victims of harassment, not perpetrators of scandal. If the town still wants to judge me after that, then they're fools. But I'm not hiding anymore. Pride flickered across Grant's face. Want company? No, this is something I need to do myself. She managed a smile. But thank you for offering. 2 hours later, Eliza rode into Pinecrest alone. The town felt different somehow. Or maybe she was different. She held her head high as she tied her horse outside the general store, ignoring the stares and whispers. The school board met in a room behind the church. Eliza knocked firmly and entered when called. 3 men sat around a table. Horace Kemp from the store, a rancher named Bill Henderson, and surprisingly, Judge Morrison himself. Mrs. Holloway, Morrison said, not unkindly. We've been expecting you. Have you? Eliza sat in the offered chair, hands folded calmly despite her racing heart. News travels fast in small towns, Henderson said. We heard about Calvin Moore's arrest, about everything he did. He paused. We owe you an apology. Some of us believed his lies. Some of you participated in spreading them, Eliza said evenly. But I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to apply for the teaching position. Horace Kemp cleared his throat. Mrs. Holloway, you should know. Alice Larson has been vocal about you not being suitable. She's got a few others convinced. I'm aware. I'm also qualified, educated, and committed to teaching these children properly. Can Mrs. Larson say the same? Alice Larson can barely read herself, Morrison muttered. Then louder. The position is yours if you want it. $20 a month, supplies provided by the town. School runs September through May, 6 days a week. Eliza's heart soared. I accept. There's one condition, Henderson added. We need the school repaired first, after the vandalism. And we need to know you won't run off at the first sign of trouble. I've weathered months of harassment without running. I think I can handle a few disapproving mothers. Eliza leaned forward. As for repairs, my husband is skilled at carpentry. We'll help rebuild, free of charge. Community investment. The 3 men exchanged glances. Morrison nodded slowly. Then we have an agreement. School starts first Monday in September. That gives you 4 months to prepare. He stood, offered his hand. Welcome to Pinecrest, Mrs. Holloway. Officially this time. Eliza shook his hand, then Henderson's, then Kemp's. As she left the room, she felt 10 feet tall. She was a teacher. She had purpose, employment, a role in this community, whether they liked it or not. Outside, she found a small crowd had gathered. News really did travel fast. Most people looked curious, a few hostile, but one woman stepped forward with a tentative smile. Mrs. Holloway? I'm Margaret Chen. My daughter Lily will be one of your students. She was young, Chinese, clearly nervous. I just wanted to say thank you for standing up to the Moors, for not backing down. You're welcome, Eliza said, surprised. Some of us know what it's like, Margaret continued quietly. To be judged for things we can't control. To have people decide we're not good enough. She glanced at the watching crowd. I'm glad you got the position. Lily needs a teacher who understands that everyone deserves respect. The words lodged in Eliza's throat. She managed a nod, not trusting her voice. As she rode home, she thought about Margaret's face, about being seen, really seen, by someone who understood. It was a gift she hadn't expected. Grant was mending fence when she arrived. He looked up at the sound of hooves, and she couldn't contain her grin. I got it? The teaching position. I start in September. His face split in a genuine smile, rare and wonderful. Eliza, that's incredible. Congratulations. They want help repairing the school. I volunteered us. Of course you did. But Grant was laughing. We'll make time. Between ranch work and rebuilding, we'll barely sleep, but we'll manage. We always do. They stood grinning at each other like fools, and Eliza felt something shift inside her chest. This man had given her a chance when everyone else had written her off. He'd stood beside her through harassment and legal battles and attempted murder. He'd asked nothing in return except honest partnership. And somewhere along the way, he'd become more than a partner, more than a friend. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt right, natural. But Eliza wasn't ready to examine those feelings too closely. Not yet. There was too much else to focus on. The next months passed in a blur of activity. They rebuilt the schoolhouse together, Grant doing the heavy carpentry while Eliza cleaned and organized. Other townspeople helped, slowly warming to them as Calvin's trial approached and more details of his crimes became public. The trial itself was brief. Calvin's hired men testified against him in exchange for lighter sentences. Evidence of the planned arson was overwhelming. Calvin was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and the Moore family's influence in the territory evaporated like morning mist. Eliza attended the sentencing, needing to see it with her own eyes. Calvin looked diminished in his prison clothes, his arrogance finally broken. When his eyes found hers across the courtroom, she felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, just nothing. He couldn't hurt her anymore. That was enough. Summer bloomed across the valley. The ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Grant's cattle multiplied, and Eliza's garden produced enough vegetables to sell in town. They worked from dawn to dusk, fell into bed exhausted, and woke to do it again. But there was joy in the work now. Purpose. The ranch house slowly transformed into a real home, with curtains and comfortable furniture and the smell of fresh bread filling the kitchen. Eliza found herself singing while she worked, laughing at Grant's dry jokes, looking forward to their evening conversations when the day's work was done. And Grant, he seemed lighter too. The permanent furrow between his brows eased. He smiled more, talked more, slowly let her see the man he'd been before grief had hardened him. They were becoming something more than partners. Exactly what, Eliza wasn't sure, but it felt important, precious. One evening in late August, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. The air was warm, crickets sang in the grass, and everything felt perfect in a way that scared Eliza with its fragility. School starts in 2 weeks, Grant observed. I know. I'm nervous. You'll be wonderful. Those kids are lucky to have you. Eliza glanced at him. You really believe that? I do. Grant met her eyes. You're patient, smart, creative, and you understand what it's like to feel worthless. You'll never make a child feel that way. The casual confidence in his voice made her throat tight. Thank you. That means a lot. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Grant spoke again, his tone careful. Eliza, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy? Here, I mean, with this life we've built. The question caught her off guard. Was she happy? Eliza examined her feelings honestly. Yes, she said finally. I am. Not the way I was happy with Thomas, That was young and uncomplicated. This is different. Harder won, maybe, but real. Grant nodded slowly. I'm happy too. I didn't think I would be again after Sarah and Emma. But this partnership, this life, it's good. Just good? Eliza teased gently. Better than good. Grant's voice dropped. You've reminded me what it's like to have someone to care about, to build something with. I'd forgotten how much that matters. Eliza's heart beat faster. They were skating close to territory they'd carefully avoided for months, feelings that went beyond partnership into something neither had named. Grant, she said quietly, what are we doing? Really? He looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. I don't know. What do you want us to be doing? It was the question she'd been avoiding, the one that required honesty she wasn't sure she was brave enough to give. I don't want this to be pretend anymore, she heard herself say. The marriage, I mean. I know we agreed it would be practical, just legal protection. But somewhere along the way, it became real to me. You became real to me. Grant went very still. Real how? Real like I care if you're safe. Real like I miss you when you're gone too long checking the herd. Real like when you smile at something I've said, I feel it here. She pressed a hand to her chest. I know that's not what we agreed. I know this was supposed to be simple, but Grant kissed her. It wasn't like their awkward wedding kiss. This was real, deep, full of months of suppressed feeling. Eliza gasped against his mouth, then kissed him back with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grant rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that for weeks, he admitted, but I didn't want to pressure you. Didn't want you to think I was taking advantage of our arrangement. You're not. I promise, you're not. Eliza cupped his face, feeling the rasp of his beard against her palms. I'm choosing this. Choosing you. Not because I need protection or security, but because I want you. I want you too. Have for a while now. Grant's hand settled on her waist, warm and sure. But Eliza, I need you to understand, this isn't me trying to replace Sarah. What we have is different, its own thing. I know, I'm not trying to replace Thomas either. Eliza smiled. We're building something new, something that's just ours. Grant kissed her again, softer this time, sweet and full of promise. So what now? He asked when they parted. Now we stop pretending this is just business. Eliza laughed, giddy with relief and joy. Now we try being actually married, for real. I'd like that. Grant stood, offered his hand. Want to come upstairs? To my room? The invitation was clear, and Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. But she took his hand without hesitation. Yes. They went inside together, leaving the porch and its careful distance behind. What happened next was private, tender, a claiming that went both ways. This was no business arrangement, no marriage of convenience. This was choice. This was love, hard-won and real. Afterward, lying in Grant's bed with his arm around her, Eliza felt complete in a way she'd never expected. The journey from exile to this moment had been brutal, but it had brought her here, to this man, this life, this unexpected joy. What are you thinking? Grant murmured. That the Moors sent me here as punishment. Eliza traced patterns on his chest. They meant to break me, to make me suffer. Instead, they gave me the greatest gift. Yeah? You, this, a chance to choose my own life. She looked up at him. I was sent here as garbage to be discarded, but you saw me as treasure. You became my treasure. Grant's arms tightened around her. You saved me too, you know. I was just existing, not living, going through motions. You reminded me what it feels like to hope. They lay together in the darkness, two broken people who'd found wholeness in each other. It wasn't a fairy tale. There would still be hard days, still be struggles, but they'd face them together. The first day of school arrived bright and clear. Eliza dressed carefully in her most professional outfit, her hair pinned in a neat bun. Grant kissed her at the door, pride and love clear in his eyes. Knock 'em dead, teacher. I'll try not to terrify them too badly. The schoolhouse stood ready, freshly painted and repaired. Inside, 12 students waited nervously, ranging from 6-year-old twins to a lanky 14-year-old boy who clearly didn't want to be there. Eliza stood at the front of the classroom and looked at their faces. Some curious, some skeptical, all watching to see what kind of teacher she'd be. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Mrs. Holloway. Some of you may have heard things about me, some true, some not. But here's what matters. In this classroom, everyone is equal. Rich or poor, boy or girl, whatever your background. If you're willing to learn, I'm willing to teach." A small Chinese girl, Lily Chen, raised her hand tentatively. "Even if our parents don't like you?" "Even then. What your parents think is between them and their conscience. What happens in this classroom is between us." Eliza smiled. "Now, let's see where everyone is with reading." The day passed in a blur. Some students were barely literate, others quite advanced. Eliza made notes, planned lessons, and felt purpose singing through her veins. This was what she was meant to do. Not be decorative on some man's arm, but shape young minds. Make a difference. When school ended, parents came to collect their children. Some were friendly, some coldly polite. Alice Larson arrived with pinched lips and didn't speak at all. But Margaret Chen smiled and thanked Eliza for making Lily feel welcome. And Bill Henderson's wife admitted grudgingly that her son had actually enjoyed himself. Small victories. They added up. Grant was waiting when she got home, dinner already cooking. "How was it?" he asked eagerly. "Wonderful. Exhausting. Perfect." Eliza collapsed into a chair. "I have so much planning to do, so many different skill levels to address. But Grant, I love it. I absolutely love it." His smile was brilliant. "I'm so glad." They ate dinner discussing her students and their needs, Grant offering suggestions with surprising insight. After, they worked together cleaning up, moving around each other with the ease of long practice. Later, in bed, Grant pulled her close. "I'm proud of you. You know that, right?" "I know. And I'm proud of us, of what we've built here." Eliza nestled against his chest. "We survived winter, survived Calvin, survived everything they threw at us. We did more than survive. We thrived." Grant pressed a kiss to her hair. "You know what the best part is?" "What?" "We chose this. You weren't sent here anymore. You chose to stay. I didn't have to be alone. I chose to open up. Every day we're choosing each other." It was true. The exile that had brought them together was long past. Now they were here by choice, building a life by choice, loving by choice. Eliza thought about the woman she'd been 10 months ago, broken, ashamed, convinced she was worthless. That woman would never recognize who she'd become. Strong, purposeful, loved, and loving. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. For treating me like I mattered when everyone else said I didn't." Grant's arms tightened. "You've always mattered. I just helped you remember." Fall deepened into winter, but this time there was no fear in the cold. The ranch was secure, the house was warm, and they had each other. Eliza's students progressed rapidly under her teaching. Even the skeptical parents had to admit their children were learning. Slowly, grudgingly, the town began to accept her. Not everyone. Alice Larson remained hostile, but enough that it felt like community. And through it all, Eliza and Grant grew closer. The careful boundaries of their early partnership dissolved into genuine intimacy. They laughed together, worked together, made plans for the future together. One snowy December evening, Eliza realized she was late. Very late. Her hands shook as she counted days, recounted, confirmed what her body was already telling her. She was pregnant. The news hit like lightning, terrifying and wonderful all at once. After the Moore's accusations, after being called barren and worthless, she was carrying Grant's child. She told him that night, watching his face carefully for his reaction. Grant went pale, then flushed, then broke into a grin so wide it must have hurt. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor." Eliza's hand went to her still flat stomach. "Grant, I know this changes things. I know we didn't plan." He kissed her quiet. "This is amazing. Wonderful. A gift. You're not worried after Emma—" "I'm terrified," Grant admitted. "But I'm also happy. We'll face whatever comes together, like we always do." Eliza felt tears spill over, happy tears, for once. "I never thought I'd get this chance. After Thomas. After everything they took. You deserve every happiness." Grant cupped her face tenderly. You're going to be an incredible mother. And you'll be an incredible father. Again. His expression flickered with old grief, but underneath was hope. New life growing from old loss. A chance to honor Emma's memory by loving another child. They told no one for months, wanting to keep the joy private and safe. But as Eliza's belly grew and her condition became obvious, the truth emerged. The town's reaction was mixed, some genuinely happy for them, some smugly certain this proved their suspicions about the hasty marriage, some outright cruel. But Eliza had learned not to care about others' opinions. She was happy. Grant was happy. That was enough. She taught through her 6th month, then handed the school over to a substitute Grant hired. The town grumbled about the expense, but her students cried when she left, promising to work hard until she returned. Spring came again, painting the valley in wildflowers and new grass. Eliza's belly was round and full, the baby active. Grant hovered, protective and excited and terrified in equal measure. "What if something goes wrong?" he asked one night, his hand on her stomach feeling their child kick. "Then we'll handle it, together." Eliza covered his hand with hers. "But Grant, nothing is going wrong. I'm healthy, the baby's strong. We're going to be fine." "You can't know that." "No, but I can choose to believe it," she smiled. "We've survived everything else. We'll survive this too." The baby came on a warm May morning after a labor that was long but uncomplicated. Grant paced the bedroom while the doctor and midwife worked until Eliza demanded he come hold her hand. "If I'm doing this, you're staying right here," she gasped between contractions. So he stayed, whispering encouragement, wiping her face, being strong when she needed him to be. And when their daughter finally arrived, crying lustily, Grant wept openly. "She's perfect," he said, cradling the tiny bundle. "Eliza, she's perfect." Eliza, exhausted but elated, watched him hold their child. The love on his face was pure and overwhelming. "What should we name her?" she asked. Grant looked at her, then at the baby. "Hope, because that's what she is. What you both are. My hope for the future." "Hope Holloway." Eliza tested the name. "I love it." Grant brought the baby to her, and Eliza held her daughter for the first time. This tiny person, this miracle, this proof that life could be rebuilt from ruins. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. Exile, winter, partnership, love. Every hard step had led to this moment. The Moors had meant to break her. Instead, they'd given her everything. Summer returned to the valley, bringing warmth and growth. Eliza recovered slowly, learning to be a mother with Grant's patient help. He was wonderful with hope, gentle, attentive, clearly treasuring every moment. "I never thought I'd get this again," he admitted one night, watching the baby sleep. "After losing Emma, I thought that door was closed forever." "Life has a way of surprising us." Eliza leaned against him. "Sometimes the worst things lead to the best things." "You're the best thing that ever happened to me. You know that, right? Even though I arrived angry and half-frozen, fighting you every step?" "Especially because of that." Grant kissed her temple. "You fought for yourself when no one else would. That's what made me fall in love with you." The word love still made Eliza's heart skip. They'd been saying it for months now, but it never lost its power. "I love you too," she said. "More than I thought possible." In September, Eliza returned to teaching, bringing hope with her. The baby slept in a cradle at the back of the classroom while Eliza taught, and the students took turns rocking her when she fussed. It wasn't conventional, but it worked. And slowly, even the most disapproving parents had to admit that Mrs. Holloway was the best teacher Pinecrest had ever had. One afternoon in late autumn, a year and a half after she'd first arrived at Grant's cabin, Eliza stood on the porch watching the sunset. Hope was asleep inside, Grant was finishing evening chores, and everything felt impossibly perfect. She thought about the woman who'd been dumped in the snow like garbage, who'd believed she was worthless, broken, fit only to be hidden away. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone strong, someone valued, someone who'd built a life from nothing and refused to be ashamed of it. Grant emerged from the barn and crossed the yard to join her. He slipped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how the Moors sent me here as punishment." Eliza leaned into him. "They thought I'd suffer, that I'd be miserable and desperate. that I'd come crawling back. But you didn't. No, I found something better. I found you, found myself, found purpose and love, and a future I never imagined. She turned in his arms to face him. They sent me to you as a curse, but I became your greatest treasure. And you became mine, Grant said softly. My safe harbor when grief was drowning me. My partner when I thought I'd always be alone. My love when I'd given up on loving again. They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors that promised another beautiful day to come. Inside, hope stirred and made small baby noises. They went in together, this family forged from exile and choice, from survival and stubbornness, from two broken people who dared to build something whole. The past had been brutal, the present was beautiful, and the future stretched ahead, full of possibility. Eliza had been sent away to disappear. Instead, she'd found where she belonged, and she was never leaving again.